When the shy waitress whispered, "Don't sign that," the entire boardroom fell silent. Nobody expected the trembling woman in the corner to speak. Nobody imagined she was about to destroy a billion-dollar conspiracy. And absolutely nobody knew she was the architect who designed the trap in the first place. This is the story of Claire Bennett, the invisible waitress who became the most dangerous woman in Manhattan. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And hit that like button if you believe the underestimated can rise again. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Aurelius, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, where reservations required 3 months' notice and a willingness to spend what most people earned in a week. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables where power players carved up markets like aged steaks. Claire Bennett moved between those tables like a ghost. She'd perfected the art of invisibility over 3 years of serving people who never looked at her face. Head down, voice soft. Hand steady despite the constant tremor that lived in her chest these days. The uniform helped. Black dress, white apron. Hair pulled back so tight it hurt. She looked exactly like what they expected. Forgettable, replaceable, beneath notice. That invisibility had become her armor and her prison. "More water for table 6, she murmured to herself, because talking to herself was safer than talking to anyone else. Her therapist said it was a coping mechanism. Claire just knew it kept her company during the long silences. She refilled glasses at a corner table where 2 hedge fund managers dissected a competitor's divorce settlement, neither acknowledging her presence even as she stood inches away. She'd learned not to expect eye contact. People who paid $400 for dinner didn't see the help. Most nights, that suited her fine. Tonight was different. Tonight, Ethan Vale had reserved the private dining room. Claire had served him twice before, both times for smaller meetings, both times leaving with the unsettling feeling that he actually saw her. Not in a creepy way, just saw. The way he'd pause mid-sentence when she approached, as if her presence actually registered. The way he'd said thank you and meant it, making the word sound less like dismissal and more like acknowledgement. It had rattled her both times. She'd requested a different section tonight. "Claire!" Michael, the floor manager, appeared at her elbow. "I need you in the Constellation room." Her stomach dropped. "I thought Jessica was covering private dining." "Jessica called in sick. You're up." He was already walking away, expecting obedience. Claire's fingers tightened on her water pitcher. The Constellation room was where they held the meetings that mattered, the ones that moved millions, destroyed careers, built empires. She preferred the anonymous safety of the main floor. But saying no meant questions. Questions meant attention. Attention meant risk. So she followed. The Constellation room lived up to its name, a circular space with a domed ceiling painted to resemble a night sky. Constellations picked out in actual gold leaf. A single massive table dominated the center. Around it sat 8 people, all men except for one woman in a sharp navy suit who looked like she could buy and sell everyone Claire had ever known. At the head of the table sat Ethan Vale. He looked exactly like his photographs. Dark hair going silver at the temples, sharp jaw, eyes the color of storm clouds. But photographs couldn't capture the stillness he carried, the sense that while everyone else in the room was performing, he was simply existing. 32 years old and worth more than some small countries, according to the gossip magazines that circulated through the break room. Claire had never cared about money. She'd had it once, lost it, learned it couldn't protect you from the things that actually hurt. "Gentlemen, Ms. Torres," Ethan was saying, his voice carrying that particular timbre that made people lean in. "I appreciate the revisions to Section 12. Shall we review the environmental compliance addendums before we move to signatures?" Claire stationed herself against the wall, trying to disappear into the constellation Cassiopeia. She'd memorized the sky ceiling during her first week, finding comfort in the unchanging patterns when everything else felt chaotic. Across from Ethan sat Victor Holloway, a man whose smile never reached his eyes. Claire had seen his picture too, usually in business journals, standing beside buildings or shaking hands with politicians. 60 years old, silver fox handsome, the kind of wealth that came with old family names and older money. She didn't trust him, couldn't say why. Just a feeling in her gut, the same instinct that had once made her a good attorney before everything fell apart. Don't think about that. Don't remember. But lately the memories pushed back harder, especially when she stood in rooms like this, surrounded by legal talk and contract negotiations. The vocabulary alone was enough to trigger flashbacks. Indemnification clauses, liability transfers, due diligence. Stop, breathe, you're just here to pour wine. Mr. Vale, Victor was saying, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. I think you'll find everything in order. My legal team has been exceptionally thorough. I'm sure they have. Ethan gestured to one of his advisors, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who looked perpetually anxious. James, you've reviewed the final draft? Cover to cover, sir, twice. Everything checks out. Claire poured water into crystal glasses, moving clockwise around the table. The conversation washed over her. Revenue projections, market positioning, synergy optimization, corporate speak designed to make simple things sound complex. She'd almost made it back to her wall when Victor's attorney slid a leather portfolio across the table to Ethan. The final contract of Victor announced. I believe you'll find this represents a fair and comprehensive agreement. Your company acquires Holloway Industries' manufacturing division. We retain the real estate holdings and legacy partnerships. Clean, simple, mutually beneficial. Ethan accepted the portfolio, fingers brushing the embossed cover. 3 months of negotiation condensed into how many pages? 97, this anxious advisor supplied, down from the original 143. Progress. Ethan opened the portfolio. Claire shouldn't have looked, should have kept her eyes on the floor, on the constellation ceiling, anywhere else. But something about Victor's smile made her glance at the papers as Ethan turned pages. Standard letterhead. Vale Industries logo on one side, Holloway Industries on the other. Dense paragraphs of legal language, the kind that looked impressive but mostly restated the same points in slightly different words. She recognized the format. Of course she did. She'd drafted hundreds of contracts in her previous life, back when she believed the law could be clean and fair and true. Ethan was reading through steadily, occasionally pausing to reread a section. His advisors watched with the tense energy of people who'd built their careers on not missing details. Section 15, Ethan said, the Environmental Liability Clause. This states that Vale Industries assumes all responsibility for environmental compliance going forward, but Holloway Industries retains liability for any pre-existing violations. Correct? Correct, Victor's attorney confirmed. Standard practice in acquisitions of this nature. And the cutoff date is the date of signature. Anything before tonight remains Holloway's responsibility. Anything after becomes yours. Clear enough? But Claire's hands had started shaking. She was standing at the wrong angle, could see the pages better than she should have. And tucked between sections 15 and 16, in slightly smaller font, was a paragraph that didn't match the surrounding text. It took her 3 seconds to read it, 3 seconds to understand what she was seeing, 3 seconds for her entire world to tilt sideways. No, she whispered. The word fell into the room like a stone into still water. Everyone turned. Claire's face went hot, then cold. She'd spoken. Actually spoken. In front of all these people, in the middle of their important meeting, she'd opened her mouth and broken the most fundamental rule of invisibility. I'm sorry, she stammered, backing toward the wall. I didn't mean I should. What did you say? Ethan was looking at her, actually looking, his full attention focused like a spotlight she couldn't escape. Nothing. I'm sorry. Please continue. She wanted to dissolve into the gold leaf constellations. You said no. His voice wasn't angry, just curious, precise. No to what? Claire's throat closed. Every instinct screamed at her to apologize again, to flee, to return to invisibility where she was safe. These weren't her people anymore. This wasn't her world. She had no right to speak here, no authority, no voice that mattered. But that paragraph, that terrible buried paragraph. Victor was smiling at her now, the kind of smile a shark might give a confused fish. I think our server may have had a long night. Perhaps we should give her a break. I'm fine, Claire heard herself say. Then perhaps you could explain your outburst. The woman in the navy suit, Miss Torres, spoke with icy precision. We're in the middle of rather important business. Claire looked at Ethan. He was still watching her, and there was something in his expression she couldn't quite read. Not anger, not annoyance. Something closer to Interest? The contract, she said quietly. Between sections 15 and 16, there's... She stopped, fear wrapping around her words. There's what? Ethan asked. A clause about environmental liability transfer. Victor laughed, the sound warm and dismissive. Young lady, I assure you our legal team knows what they're doing. Why don't you fetch us some more wine? But Ethan hadn't looked away from Claire. What kind of clause? The room had gone very still. Claire could feel 7 pairs of eyes on her, could feel her pulse hammering in her throat. This was a mistake. She should apologize, leave, never speak up again, except people were going to get hurt. Ethan was going to get hurt. It says, she had to force the words out. It says that Vale Industries assumes retroactive environmental liability for all Holloway Industries operations dating back 15 years. Not going forward, going back. Silence. Then Victor's attorney spoke, his voice patient in the way you'd speak to a confused child. That's simply not true. Section 15 clearly states, Section 15 is in 12-point font, Claire interrupted, surprising herself. The paragraph between 15 and 16 is in 11-point. Different font size, slightly different spacing. It's designed to be skipped when reading in sequence. Ethan's jaw tightened. He looked down at the contract, really looked this time. That's ridiculous, Ms. Torres said. We've had multiple attorneys review this document. If there was a hidden clause, they would have found it. They would have found it if they were looking for it, Claire said. But if you're reading quickly, expecting Section 16 to follow Section 15, your eye jumps right over it. It's a technique called contractual camouflage. You hide important language in plain sight by breaking the reader's visual pattern. How would you know that? The anxious advisor asked. Claire didn't answer, couldn't answer, because answering meant explaining who she used to be, and that person was supposed to be dead and buried. Ethan was reading the paragraph now, his expression darkening with each line. When he finished, he looked up at Victor. Tell me this is a mistake. Victor's smile had frozen. Ethan, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. This clause would make my company liable for 15 years of environmental violations I had no part in. Ethan's voice was very quiet, which somehow made it more dangerous. Violations that you know about, that you're trying to bury in my lap before the EPA catches up. That's a serious accusation. It's what the contract says. Ethan closed the portfolio. Who wrote this? Victor's attorney had gone pale. Sir, I can assure you that any discrepancies answer the question. Our legal team prepared the final draft, but multiple parties reviewed. Claire. Ethan was looking at her again. How did you know to look for this? The question hung in the air between them. Claire could feel the weight of it, the danger. If she answered truthfully, she'd have to explain about her past. If she lied, she'd lose whatever credibility she'd just built. I used to be an attorney, she said finally. Before. Before what? Before I wasn't anymore. It wasn't a real answer, but Ethan didn't push. He just nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something he'd suspected. Everyone out, he said. Victor stood. Now wait just a minute. Everyone, out, except Claire. The room erupted in protests. Ms. Torres insisted they couldn't make business decisions based on a waitress's paranoia. Victor's attorney threatened legal action. The advisors exchanged panicked looks. Ethan just waited, patient as stone, until they left. When the door closed behind them, the silence felt like pressure against Claire's eardrums. Sit, Ethan said, gesturing to Victor's abandoned chair. Claire's legs carried her forward before her brain could object. She sat, acutely aware that she was still wearing her uniform, that she probably smelled like kitchen grease and fear. Ethan slid the contract across to her. Show me. Her hand shook as she turned pages. There. The paragraph that didn't quite match. She pointed. Ethan read it 3 times. Claire watched his face, saw the moment understanding crystallized into anger. How much would this cost me? He asked. Impossible to say without knowing the extent of Holloway's violations, but if the EPA's been building a case for 15 years, billions in cleanup costs, possible criminal charges, complete destruction of your company's reputation. And if I'd signed this, you'd be legally responsible for everything, Holloway would walk away clean. Ethan leaned back, fingers steepled under his chin. You said you used to be an attorney. What kind? Corporate law, mergers, acquisitions, environmental compliance. Past tense. Claire looked at her hands. I made a mistake. Lost my license. What kind of mistake? The kind where powerful people needed a scapegoat, and I was convenient. She waited for the inevitable questions, the demands for details. But Ethan just nodded again, as if this too made sense to him. This technique you mentioned, contractual camouflage, that's not common knowledge. No. Did you invent it? Claire's chest tightened. I developed it, years ago, as a way to stress test contracts for hidden vulnerabilities. I wrote a paper about it during my first year at Morrison and Blake. The name hung in the air between them. Morrison and Blake, one of the most prestigious corporate law firms in the country. Claire watched recognition flicker across Ethan's face. You worked at Morrison and Blake? For 3 years. Then I didn't. Because? Because I found out they were using my techniques to hide illegal clauses in client contracts. When I tried to report it, they framed me for the very fraud they were committing. Destroyed my career, my reputation, my license. I couldn't prove I was innocent, so I became guilty by default. Saying it out loud felt like reopening a wound that had never properly healed. Claire waited for disbelief, for dismissal, for the look people gave her when they decided she was lying or crazy, or both. Instead, Ethan said, Morrison and Blake represents Holloway Industries. Claire's head snapped up. What? They've been Victor's primary counsel for 20 years. They prepared his side of this contract. Ethan's eyes had gone very cold. Which means they used your own technique against me. The room seemed to tilt. Claire gripped the edge of the table, trying to process what he was saying. Her old firm. The people who destroyed her. They'd taken her work and weaponized it, and now they were trying to destroy someone else with it. I need to know something, Ethan said quietly. And I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you involved in this? What? No, I had no idea, Because from where I'm sitting, a former Morrison and Blake attorney who just happens to be working as a waitress at the exact restaurant where I'm signing a Morrison and Blake contract seems like a remarkable coincidence. Claire's blood ran cold. You think I'm part of this? You think I'm working with them? I think I need to consider every possibility. I haven't spoken to anyone at Morrison and Blake in 3 years. They made sure I'd never work in law again. Why would I help them? Blackmail, debt, a dozen other reasons. But his voice had softened slightly, as if he was testing her more than accusing her. I warned you not to sign, Claire said. If I was part of their plan, why would I do that? Perhaps to position yourself as a trusted ally, perhaps to negotiate a better deal for yourself, perhaps… He stopped. Perhaps I'm being paranoid. You should be paranoid. This whole thing is designed to destroy you. Ethan studied her for a long moment. Claire forced herself to meet his gaze, to let him see whatever he needed to see. Tell me about Morrison and Blake, he said finally. Everything. So she did. She told him about joining the firm straight out of law school, bright-eyed and convinced she could make a difference. About developing her contract analysis techniques and being praised as innovative, a rising star. About the day she discovered senior partners using her methods to hide illegal environmental dumping clauses in contracts for chemical companies. They made millions helping corporations avoid cleanup costs, she said. I found evidence of at least 30 contracts over 5 years. Billions in violations just vanished into legal language. And when you reported it? They were faster than I was. By the time I tried to blow the whistle, they'd already planted evidence that I'd accepted bribes from clients. Forged emails, doctored bank records, testimony from colleagues who suddenly remembered me doing suspicious things. I couldn't prove any of it was false. Why didn't you fight it? Claire's laugh was bitter. With what? They had unlimited resources and the best lawyers in the country. I had student loan debt and a public defender. The state bar suspended my license pending investigation. The investigation found exactly what Morrison and Blake wanted them to find. You could have appealed. I tried, for a year, until my savings ran out and my apartment got broken into and someone left a very polite note explaining that persistence would be bad for my health. She met his eyes. I learned to disappear instead. Into restaurants. Into invisibility. Ethan was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, how many people know about your techniques? Maybe a dozen senior partners at Morrison and Blake. Some of their corporate clients. It's not something they teach widely. Too risky. But they definitely kept the documentation. I wrote extensive guides on how to identify and exploit visual reading patterns in legal documents. And now they're using those guides to trap me. Yes. Which means you're the only person who can reliably identify all the traps they've hidden. Claire hadn't thought of it that way. I suppose. Not suppose. Fact. Ethan leaned forward. Claire, I need you to do something for me. What? I need you to tear this contract apart. Every page, every clause, every paragraph. Find every trap, every hidden bomb, every piece of camouflaged language. Can you do that? Yes, but I'm not an attorney anymore. You're a consultant. I'm hiring you as an independent contract analyst. Ethan, Mr. Vale, you don't understand. If Morrison and Blake finds out I'm involved, they'll come after me again. They won't touch you. His voice carried absolute certainty. You'll be working under my protection, in my building, with my security. And when this is over, we're going to make them regret ever crossing either of us. Claire wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe anyone could protect her from the machine that had crushed her before. But she'd learned the hard way that promises from powerful men rarely held. Why would you trust me? She asked. You just accused me of being part of this. Because if you were part of it, you wouldn't have warned me. You would have let me sign, let the trap spring, and disappeared with whatever they were paying you. He paused. And because when I looked at you just now talking about what they did to you, I saw someone who wants revenge as badly as I do. He wasn't wrong. The desire for revenge had kept Claire going through years of minimum wage jobs and humiliation, a constant low flame she couldn't quite extinguish. I'm scared, she admitted. Good. Fear means you understand the stakes. Ethan stood, pulled out his phone. I'm calling my head of security. He'll take you to my headquarters tonight. You'll have everything you need, office space, research access, protection. And Claire? Yes? Thank you for speaking up. I know that cost you something. It had cost her invisibility, the armor she'd worn for 3 years. But looking at Ethan Vale, at this man who'd actually listened when a waitress interrupted his billion-dollar deal, Claire thought maybe some costs were worth paying. There's one more thing, she said quietly. If they used my technique here, they've probably used it in other contracts. How many deals has Holloway Industries closed in the last 5 years? Ethan's expression darkened. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. Then this isn't just about you. This is about every company they've sold to, every merger they've completed. They've been running this scam for years, using your technique every time. Yes. Then we're not just stopping one deal. Ethan's smile was sharp as broken glass. We're burning their entire operation to the ground. Outside the Constellation room, Claire could hear raised voices. Victor demanding to be let back in, attorneys threatening lawsuits, advisors panicking about delays. The world of power and money and corporate warfare, the world she'd once belonged to. I don't have anything to wear, she said, looking down at her uniform. If I'm going to your headquarters, we'll get you clothes, everything you need. I don't have credentials anymore, no bar license, no references, nothing that says I'm qualified to do this. You just saved me from a multi-billion-dollar trap by spotting a font size difference. I think your qualifications speak for themselves. Claire's hands were still shaking, but not entirely from fear anymore. Something else was building beneath the terror, something that felt almost like hope. Okay, she said, I'll do it. Good. Ethan moved toward the door, then paused. Claire, what made you speak up? You could have stayed quiet, stayed invisible. Why didn't you? She thought about it, about the moment when invisibility and courage went to war inside her chest, and courage won by the thinnest margin. Because, she said finally, I'm tired of watching bad people win. Ethan nodded as if this made perfect sense. So am I. He opened the door to chaos, executives shouting, attorneys threatening, Victor's face purple with rage. But none of them mattered anymore. The meeting was over. The deal was dead. And somewhere in Manhattan, Morrison and Blake had no idea that the scapegoat they'd buried 3 years ago had just crawled out of her grave. Claire followed Ethan into the storm of angry voices. No longer invisible, no longer safe, but for the first time in 3 years, no longer silent. The waitress who used to be an attorney was about to remind some very powerful people why they'd been so afraid of her in the first place. The elevator ride to the 47th floor of Vale Tower felt longer than it should have. Claire stood beside Marcus Chen, Ethan's head of security, a compact man with graying temples who'd said exactly 7 words since picking her up from Aurelius. "Miss Bennett, this way. Watch your step." She was still wearing her waitress uniform. At 11 p.m., riding up through one of Manhattan's most exclusive buildings dressed like she should be clearing tables, Claire felt the absurdity of her situation settle over her like a coat that didn't fit. "Mr. Chen," she started. Marcus, does Mr. Vale often bring waitresses to his office in the middle of the night?" The corner of his mouth twitched. "You'd be the first. That's either reassuring or terrifying. Probably both." The elevator doors opened onto a floor that looked nothing like Claire expected. She'd imagined sleek corporate minimalism, glass and steel, and expensive emptiness. Instead, she found herself in a space that felt almost lived in. Yes, there were the requisite floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the polished hardwood floors, the art that probably cost more than she'd earn in a lifetime. But there were also stacks of files on every available surface, a coffee maker that looked well-used, and what appeared to be a child's drawing taped to one wall. "Conference rooms this way," Marcus said, leading her down a hallway lined with photographs. Claire caught glimpses as they walked. Ethan shaking hands with politicians, cutting ribbons, accepting awards. And in several frames, a little girl with dark curls and his same storm gray eyes. The conference room could have held 20 people comfortably. Right now it held Ethan, 3 very unhappy-looking attorneys, and enough tension to fill the space twice over. "Completely unprecedented," one of the attorneys was saying. "A woman in her 50s with steel gray hair pulled into a bun tight enough to cause headaches. We can't simply abandon a deal of this magnitude based on—" She stopped when she saw Claire. "Based on what Sandra was about to say," Ethan said calmly, "is based on a waitress's word. But since that waitress just saved us from committing corporate suicide, I'd suggest we adjust our language." Sandra's jaw tightened. "I meant no disrespect. However, we have procedures, due diligence protocols. We can't operate on—" "Show them," Ethan said to Claire. Claire's mouth went dry. "Now? Now." The contract lay spread across the conference table like evidence at a crime scene. Claire approached it the way she might approach a snake, carefully, ready to pull back. "Here," she said, pointing to the paragraph between sections 15 and 16. 11-point font instead of 12. Slightly compressed line spacing. It's designed to be overlooked when you're reading in sequence. The 3 attorneys leaned in. Sandra pulled reading glasses from her jacket pocket. "I see the font difference," admitted one of the men, younger than Sandra, with the eager energy of someone still trying to prove himself. "But that could be a formatting error. We've seen those before in multi-party contracts." "Read it," Claire said. "Read what it actually says." Sandra read aloud, her voice growing quieter with each sentence. When she finished, the silence in the room felt heavy enough to crush them. "That can't be right," the 3rd attorney said, a nervous-looking man Claire mentally dubbed Sweaty Hands based on the way he kept wiping his palms on his pants. "We reviewed this contract 3 times. I personally checked every environmental clause." "You checked Section 15, Claire said. "This isn't Section 15. It's an insertion between sections, designed to be skipped by readers trained to move sequentially from one numbered section to the next." "How do you know that?" Sandra asked. "How do you know it's deliberate and not just sloppy drafting?" Claire met her eyes. "Because I invented the technique." That got their attention. "Explain," Ethan said, settling into a chair at the head of the table. It wasn't a request. So Claire explained again, in more detail this time. About Morrison and Blake, about her research into visual reading patterns and contractual blind spots, about how she'd discovered that human eyes were predictable in the worst ways. "We're trained from childhood to follow sequences," she said. "Numbers, letters, patterns. When you're reading a contract and you see Section 15 followed by Section 16, your brain automatically assumes everything between them is transitional language or formatting. It takes conscious effort to break that assumption." "And Morrison and Blake weaponized this?" the younger attorney asked. They weaponized my research, yes. Sandra was rereading the hidden clause, her expression growing darker. If this is enforceable, and I'm not saying it is, but if it were, we'd be assuming liability for environmental violations dating back to 2011, before Vail Industries even existed in its current form. That's the point, Claire said. It's not just unfair. It's impossible to defend against. How do you prove you weren't responsible for contamination that happened before you owned the property? We'd have documentation, Sweaty Hands insisted. Transfer records, surveys, which Holloway's legal team will have already doctored or destroyed, Claire interrupted. This isn't their first time. They've done this before to other companies. The documentation you need won't exist when you go looking for it. Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned, then showed the screen to Marcus, who'd positioned himself near the door like a well-dressed sentinel. Victor's attorneys are threatening litigation, Ethan said. Breach of contract, defamation, tortious interference, the usual intimidation playbook. Let them threaten, Sandra said, her earlier skepticism apparently abandoned. This contract is unconscionable. No court would enforce it. You sure about that? Claire asked quietly. I've practiced law for 28 years, and I've seen Morrison and Blake convince courts that unconscionable contracts were perfectly reasonable. Claire's voice was harder than she intended. They're very good at what they do, very good at making judges believe that sophisticated parties like Ethan should have known better, should have caught the trap. She's right, the younger attorney said. Caveat emptor still applies in commercial transactions. They'll argue Vail Industries had every opportunity to conduct thorough due diligence. Which we did, Sweaty Hands protested. Did you? Claire looked at him. Did you check font sizes, line spacing? Did you read every single word between every single section? Or did you do what 99% of attorneys do and skim for key terms while trusting the formatting to be honest? His silence was answer enough. Ethan stood and walked to the windows overlooking Manhattan. The city glittered below them, oblivious to the small war being fought 47 floors above the street. How many contracts has Holloway Industries executed in the past 5 years? He asked. Sandra pulled out her tablet. 17 major transactions, dozens of smaller ones. And how many of those were handled by Morrison and Blake? All of them. Then they're all compromised, Claire said. Every single one potentially has hidden clauses like this. Maybe not identical, but following the same pattern, the same technique. You can't know that, Sweaty Hands said. I can absolutely know that. Morrison and Blake doesn't do anything halfway. If they're going to commit fraud, they commit it systematically. It's how they avoid detection, make it part of their standard operating procedure so nobody questions it. Ethan turned from the window. I want you to check them all. Claire blinked. What? Every contract Holloway Industries has executed through Morrison and Blake in the past 5 years. I want you to analyze them for hidden clauses. That's hundreds of pages, thousands, maybe. I'm aware. It could take weeks. Then we'd better start tonight. Ethan looked at Sandra. Get Claire access to everything we have on Holloway Industries. Financial records, property surveys, SEC filings, anything that might mention Morrison and Blake's involvement. Sir, she's not licensed, Sandra began. She's a consultant. Consultants don't need bar licenses. She's a waitress, Sweaty Hands said, then immediately looked like he regretted it. Claire felt the familiar flush of shame creep up her neck. He wasn't wrong. She was a waitress. Whatever credentials she'd once held were gone, destroyed by the same firm whose contract she was supposed to analyze. She's the only person in this building who knows how Morrison and Blake thinks, Ethan said, his voice quiet but sharp. The only person who can identify their techniques because she created those techniques. And right now, that makes her more valuable than every licensed attorney in this room combined. The shame transformed into something else, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Sandra looked at Claire for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'll have the files sent to... Where exactly is Ms. Bennett working? The executive suite, Ethan said. Corner office, south wing. That's your late wife's office, Marcus said quietly. The room went still. Claire saw something flicker across Ethan's face, pain, quickly controlled. It's been empty for 3 years, he said. About time someone used it. Nobody argued. An hour later, Claire found herself alone in an office that felt like stepping into someone else's life. The space was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a desk that probably cost more than a car, windows that turned the city into art. But it was the personal touches that hurt. A photograph on the bookshelf showing Ethan and a woman with kind eyes and dark hair. A coffee mug with "World's Best Mom" painted in a child's careful letters. A plant on the windowsill that someone was still watering. Claire touched nothing, just stood in the center of the room, feeling like an intruder in a shrine. Her name was Rebecca. Claire spun around. Ethan stood in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I'm sorry," Claire stammered. "I didn't mean to. I shouldn't be here. This is too personal. I can work somewhere else." "She would have liked you," Ethan said, walking past her to set the coffee cups on the desk. Rebecca believed in second chances, spent half her time defending people everyone else had written off. "What happened to her?" "Cancer. 3 years ago." He said it matter-of-factly, the way people do when they've told the story too many times. "She fought for 18 months, left me with our daughter Sophie, and explicit instructions to not become a bitter workaholic." "How's that going?" "Not great." A ghost of a smile. "But I'm working on it." Claire picked up one of the coffee cups, grateful for something to do with her hands. The coffee was good. Real coffee, not the break room sludge she'd grown accustomed to. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You don't know me. For all you know, everything I told you tonight is a lie." "Is it?" "No, but you couldn't know that." Ethan settled into one of the chairs facing the desk. "When Sophie was 4, she told me she could fly. Not pretend flying, actual flying. She was completely convinced. Told me detailed stories about soaring over the city at night, visiting other countries, racing with birds." "Okay," Claire said, not following. "I had 2 choices. I could dismiss her as a child with an overactive imagination, or I could listen to what she was really telling me, which was that she felt trapped, small, limited. The flying stories were her way of saying she needed more freedom, more space to grow." He looked at Claire. "Sometimes the truth isn't in the literal words. It's in the desperation behind them." "And you think I'm desperate?" "I think you stood in a room full of people who could destroy you and spoke up anyway. That's not the behavior of someone who's lying. That's the behavior of someone who's desperate for the truth to matter again." Claire's throat tightened. She took a long sip of coffee to hide the fact that her hands were shaking. "The files you requested are being compiled," Ethan continued. "Should be ready by morning. In the meantime, I need you to walk me through exactly how Morrison and Blake operates, their patterns, their techniques, everything you know." "That could take all night." I cleared my schedule, so Claire talked. She started with the basics, how Morrison and Blake recruited top graduates with promises of prestigious clients and partnership tracks. How they slowly introduced young attorneys to their special services division, the group that handled sensitive contract work for clients willing to pay premium rates for creative legal solutions. "They don't call it fraud," Claire explained. "They call it aggressive advocacy, pushing boundaries, finding innovative interpretations of regulatory language." "But it's fraud," Ethan said. "It's fraud dressed up in expensive suits and Latin phrases. They're very good at making illegal things sound sophisticated." She told him about the training sessions where senior partners taught techniques for hiding unfavorable terms in contracts, about the bonuses paid to attorneys who successfully buried liability clauses that went undetected for years, about the internal documents, which she'd foolishly tried to expose, showing systematic deception across dozens of clients. "How did they catch you?" Ethan asked. Claire had known this question was coming, had dreaded it for 3 years. "I was sloppy," she said. "Thought I was being careful, but I wasn't careful enough. I copied files to a personal drive, thinking I could take them to the state attorney general. But Morrison and Blake monitors everything. They knew what I'd done within hours. And they moved first. They moved fast. By the time I tried to report them, I was already under investigation for accepting bribes. Evidence appeared in my office: cash, forged agreements with clients, emails I'd never sent. My colleagues suddenly remembered conversations that never happened. It was efficient." "You fought back?" "I tried. Hired a lawyer with what little savings I had. But Morrison and Blake has unlimited resources and unlimited patience. They buried me in motions, delayed hearings, made every step of the process as expensive and exhausting as possible. After a year, I ran out of money and energy. Accepted a suspension of my license in exchange for dropping my accusations against the firm. That must have killed you. It did. For a while. Claire stared into her coffee cup. Then I learned to be someone else. Someone smaller, safer. Someone who didn't ask questions or make waves or believe the law could be fair. And now? Now I don't know what I am. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, you're someone who just saved me several $billion. That's a start. The office door opened. Sandra appeared, looking exhausted but grimly determined. We have a problem, she said. Another one? Ethan asked. Victor Holloway just filed an emergency injunction seeking to force you to complete the acquisition. He's claiming breach of contract, arguing that backing out now will cause irreparable harm to his company's operations and reputation. On what grounds? We never signed anything. He's arguing that months of negotiation created a binding agreement and that your refusal to proceed constitutes, Sandra checked her notes, arbitrary and capricious business conduct designed to manipulate market conditions. That's absurd, Claire said. It's Morrison and Blake, Sandra replied. Absurd is their specialty. Who's the judge? Ethan asked. Mitchell Carver, Federal District Court. Claire's stomach dropped. No. Everyone looked at her. Judge Carver handled my disciplinary hearing, she said. He's the one who suspended my license, and he's… She stopped. He's what? Ethan pressed. He's friendly with Morrison and Blake. Very friendly. His daughter works there as a junior partner. His wife serves on their charitable foundation board. He's recused himself from cases involving the firm before, but apparently not consistently. Can we object on conflict of interest grounds? Ethan asked Sandra. We can try, but judge shopping this late will look desperate. We are desperate. Then we need to be smart about it. Sandra looked at Claire. How well do you know Carver's relationship with Morrison and Blake? Well enough to know he won't rule fairly. He rubber-stamped everything they presented during my hearing, didn't question their evidence, didn't push back on their witnesses, basically let them run the entire proceeding. Did you file a complaint? With who? The Judicial Ethics Board that's half-staffed by retired judges who golf with Carver? Claire's laugh was bitter. The system protects itself. Ethan stood and walked to the windows again. Claire was starting to recognize this as his thinking posture. Back to the room, eyes on the city, mind working through problems. We're going to need leverage, he said finally. What kind of leverage? Sandra asked. The kind that makes Victor want to withdraw his injunction voluntarily. The kind that makes Morrison and Blake back off before this gets to Carver's courtroom. You're talking about blackmail, Sweaty Hands said, having appeared in the doorway behind Sandra. I'm talking about mutually assured destruction, Ethan corrected. They threatened to blow up my company with a fraudulent contract. We threatened to expose their entire operation. Fair's fair. We'd need evidence, Sandra said. Real evidence. Not just Claire's testimony about past practices. We have evidence, Claire said quietly. We have the contract itself. Clear proof of contractual camouflage. If we can demonstrate this was deliberate, if we can show a pattern, we'd need multiple examples, Sandra interrupted. One contract could be explained away as a formatting error. 3 or 4? That's a pattern. 6 or 7? That's systematic fraud. Which brings us back to analyzing every contract Holloway Industries executed through Morrison and Blake, Ethan said. How fast can you work? This last question directed at Claire. She thought about it. Thought about the hundreds of pages waiting for her, the thousands of clauses to check, the weeks of work compressed into days because that's what survival required. Fast, she said. But I can't do it alone. I'll need help. What kind of help? Research assistants, people who can pull contracts, cross-reference dates, build databases of language patterns. I can identify the camouflage techniques, but we need infrastructure to process everything efficiently. Sandra was already typing on her phone. I can pull 3 paralegals from other projects. They're discreet and fast. Make it 5, Ethan said. Whatever Claire needs. This is going to cost… I don't care what it costs. His voice carried an edge Claire hadn't heard before. Morrison and Blake tried to destroy me. Tried to destroy Claire. How many other people have they done this to? How many companies? How many careers? How many lives? We don't know, Sandra admitted. Then we find out. And when we know, we make sure everyone else knows too. Ethan turned from the window. Claire, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about saving my deal anymore. This is about burning Morrison and Blake to the ground. Completely. Permanently. Are you prepared for that? Claire thought about the last 3 years. About serving food to people who never saw her. About apologizing for existing. About the constant fear that one day someone would recognize her, would remember her face from the news articles about the fallen attorney who'd betrayed her clients. Yes, she said, I'm prepared. It's going to get ugly. They'll come after you again. Let them try. They'll use every dirty trick they know. I invented half those tricks. I know how to counter them. Ethan smiled, and for the first time Claire saw something fierce in it. Something that reminded her he hadn't built an empire by being nice. Then let's get to work, he said. The next 6 hours blurred together in a haze of coffee and contract language. Sandra's paralegals arrived, 5 sharp-eyed people who asked smart questions and worked with the kind of focused intensity that reminded Claire of her old life. She taught them what to look for. The font size discrepancies, the spacing irregularities, the sections that appeared between sections, the clauses that interrupted natural reading flow. Morrison and Blake's techniques had evolved over the years, but the core principles remained. Exploit human reading patterns, hide important language in plain sight, make the invisible obvious only in hindsight. By 5 a.m., they had found 3 more contracts with similar hidden clauses. By 6 a.m., that number had grown to 7. Look at this, one of the paralegals said, a young woman named Keisha who'd proven to have an eye for patterns. She pulled up 2 contracts on split screens. 2019 merger between Holloway Industries and Pacific Manufacturing. Hidden clause in Section 21 transferring product liability to Pacific for defects dating back 15 years. And, Claire asked, Pacific Manufacturing filed for bankruptcy 18 months later, crushed by liability claims they didn't see coming. Keisha's voice was tight with anger. They had no idea they were buying 15 years of hidden lawsuits. Claire felt sick. Pull their bankruptcy filing. See if Morrison and Blake represented them during the restructuring. 20 minutes later, they had their answer. Morrison and Blake had represented Pacific Manufacturing during bankruptcy proceedings, helping the company's executives negotiate favorable exit packages while ordinary employees lost their pensions. They destroyed the company, then profited from its collapse, Ethan said. He'd been in and out all night, checking their progress between phone calls to attorneys and crisis management specialists. That's not just fraud, that's racketeering, Sandra finished. RICO predicate acts. If we can prove a pattern of criminal activity conducted through Morrison and Blake's business structure. We can bring federal charges, Claire said, not just against individual attorneys, against the entire firm. The room went quiet as everyone absorbed the implications. That's a death sentence for the firm, one of the paralegals said. Morrison and Blake is 150 years old, hundreds of attorneys, thousands of clients. Who deserve to know they're working with criminals? Claire interrupted. How many of those clients are being defrauded right now? How many more Pacific Manufacturings are waiting to happen? She had a point, and everyone knew it. By 8 a.m., they'd identified 12 contracts with suspicious clauses. By 9 a.m., that number was 15. The pattern was clear, systematic, undeniable. We need to move on this, Ethan said, before Morrison and Blake realizes what we're doing. They already know something's wrong, Sandra pointed out. Victor's injunction makes that clear. But they don't know what we found, don't know we've identified their pattern. Ethan looked at Claire. How long before we have enough evidence to make this public? Depends on your goal. If you want to defend against Victor's injunction, we have enough now. If you want to destroy Morrison and Blake, we need more. We need to show this isn't just about Holloway Industries. We need other clients, other victims, other examples. How long? A week, maybe 2. We don't have 2 weeks. Carver scheduled a hearing on the injunction for Friday. That's 3 days, Sweaty Hand said, stating the obvious in case anyone had forgotten how calendars worked. Then we work for 3 days, Claire said, around the clock if we have to. We find every example we can, build the strongest case possible, and hit Morrison and Blake so hard they can't recover. And if it's not enough, Sandra asked, then we lose. Victor gets his injunction, Ethan gets forced into a deal that destroys his company, and Morrison and Blake keeps operating until they destroy someone else. Claire met Sandra's eyes. but I'd rather fail fighting than succeed at staying quiet. Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression softened in a way Claire hadn't seen before. I need to go, he said. Sophie's school day starts in an hour. I try to have breakfast with her before. Go, Sandra said. We have this. After Ethan left, the office felt different, less charged, more human. He's a good father, Keisha said quietly. My sister's kid goes to the same school. Says Mr. Vale shows up to everything, parent meetings, school plays, science fairs, never misses. Claire thought about the photograph on the bookshelf, the coffee mug, the careful way Ethan spoke about his late wife. He loved her, she said. Rebecca. Everyone did, Sandra said. She was the kind of person who made you want to be better. When she died, something in him died too. He's been running on duty and discipline ever since. Until tonight, Sandra agreed. First time I've seen him angry, really angry, since the funeral. It's almost a relief. They worked through the morning, breaking only for coffee and the occasional trip to the bathroom. By noon, they'd analyzed 32 contracts. By 2 p.m., that number was 45. The pattern was even worse than Claire had feared. Morrison and Blake hadn't just hidden liability clauses in Holloway Industries contracts. They'd done it for dozens of clients across multiple industries: tech companies, manufacturers, real estate developers, pharmaceutical firms. Everywhere they found opportunities to transfer risk to unsuspecting buyers, they took them. This is going to crater the entire M&A market when it breaks, Sandra said, looking at the spreadsheet they'd built tracking every compromised deal. Billions in transactions, hundreds of companies. The lawsuits alone will take decades to sort out. Good, Claire said. She was running on caffeine and spite at this point, her eyes burning from screen time and lack of sleep. Maybe it'll make people more careful about who they trust. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Ms. Bennett. The voice was smooth, professional, utterly cold. This is Richard Morrison from Morrison and Blake. I believe we need to talk. Claire's hand tightened on the phone. Richard Morrison, senior founding partner, the man who'd personally overseen her destruction 3 years ago. I have nothing to say to you, she said. That's unfortunate, because I have quite a bit to say to you. A pause. I know what you're doing, Claire. I know you're working with Ethan Vale to undermine the Holloway Industries transaction. I know you're making wild accusations about my firm based on a personal vendetta stemming from your own criminal conduct. I was never convicted of anything. You accepted a license suspension. That's an admission of guilt in anyone's book. That's a lie, and you know it. What I know is that you're interfering with legitimate business relationships. What I know is that you're making defamatory statements about Morrison and Blake's practices. And what I know is that we will crush you, again, if you don't stop immediately. Claire looked around the office, at the paralegals working through files, at Sandra reviewing contracts with the focused intensity of someone who'd found her calling, at the evidence of Morrison and Blake's systematic fraud spreading across multiple screens. Come at me, she said. I'm ready this time. Are you? Are you ready for us to reopen your disciplinary case? To find new evidence of your misconduct? To make sure you never work in any professional capacity ever again? I'm a waitress. You already destroyed my career. What else can you take from me? Your freedom. We have friends at the U.S. Attorney's Office, friends who would be very interested in hearing about someone interfering with federal court proceedings. Is that a threat? It's a promise. Stand down, Claire. Walk away from Vale, walk away from this nonsense about hidden clauses, and we'll leave you alone. Keep pushing, and we'll bury you so deep you'll never see daylight again. The line went dead. Claire sat very still, feeling her heart pound against her ribs. Around her, the paralegals had stopped working, clearly having heard at least her side of the conversation. They know, Keisha said. They know, Claire agreed. What do we do? Claire looked at the evidence they'd compiled, looked at the pattern of fraud stretching back years, looked at the future where Morrison and Blake kept destroying lives because nobody was brave enough or crazy enough to stop them. We work faster, she said. Sandra made the call to Ethan before Claire could stop her. Within 20 minutes, he was back in the office, this time with Marcus and 2 other security personnel Claire didn't recognize. Tell me exactly what Morrison said, Ethan demanded. Claire repeated the conversation as best she could remember. Her hands wrapped around a fresh cup of coffee she couldn't bring herself to drink. The caffeine was starting to make her jittery, or maybe that was just fear catching up. U.S. Attorney's Office, Marcus said quietly. That's not an empty threat. Morrison and Blake has connections there. So do I, Ethan replied. But that's not the point. The point is they're scared. Scared enough to make threats, which means we're on to something they can't afford to have exposed. Or they're trying to bait us into making a mistake, Sandra said. Push us into acting rashly so they can claim we're the ones behaving illegally. What kind of mistake? Keisha asked. Going public too early, filing complaints without sufficient evidence. Anything that makes us look like we're on a vendetta rather than uncovering legitimate fraud. Sandra looked at Claire. They'll paint you as a disgraced attorney with an axe to grind. Make this about your personal grudge rather than their criminal behavior, which is exactly what they did before, Claire said. The old familiar shame tried to rise in her chest, but she pushed it down. She'd spent 3 years drowning in that shame. She was done with it. Then we don't give them the opportunity, Ethan said. We build an airtight case. We get more evidence, more examples, more proof that this is systematic rather than isolated, and we do it in the next 72 hours. That's impossible, one of the paralegals, a quiet man named David who rarely spoke, said. We've been working 18 hours straight, and we're not even halfway through Holloway's contracts alone. Then we get more people, Ethan said. More people means more risk of leaks, Marcus pointed out. Morrison and Blake probably already has someone watching this building. The more bodies we bring in, the harder it is to maintain security. What about bringing in outside investigators? Keisha suggested. Former FBI, corporate fraud specialists, people who know how to build cases that stick. Sandra shook her head. Same problem. The more people who know what we're doing, the more chances Morrison and Blake has to get ahead of it. They could file preemptive lawsuits, destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses. We need to keep this tight. So we're stuck, David said. We're focused, Ethan corrected. Claire, what's the minimum number of cases we need to prove a pattern? Claire thought about it. Thought about RICO statutes and prosecutorial guidelines, about what would convince a judge that this wasn't coincidence or isolated misconduct. 8 to 10 clear examples across multiple clients and multiple years, she said. Enough to show it's institutional practice rather than a few rogue attorneys. We have 15 suspicious contracts now, but not all of them are going to hold up under scrutiny. We need to vet each one, confirm the hidden clauses are actually enforceable, demonstrate harm to the companies that signed them. How many can you personally vouch for right now? 5, maybe 6. The rest need more analysis. Then that's what we focus on. Forget the broader sweep. We take our 6 strongest cases, we document everything, and we build a presentation that no judge can ignore. Ethan looked around the room. Everyone clear on that? Heads nodded, though Claire could see the exhaustion starting to show. They'd all been running on adrenaline and coffee, but that only carried you so far. We need sleep, she said. Real sleep. A few hours at least. We're starting to make mistakes. We don't have time for sleep, Sandra protested. We don't have time for mistakes either. I just caught David running the same search 3 times in a row because he was too tired to remember he'd already done it. Claire softened her voice. I know the clock is ticking, but if we burn out now, we won't be any good to anyone on Friday. Ethan studied her for a moment, then nodded. 4 hours. Everyone takes 4 hours starting now. Rotating shifts, so we always have people working. Marcus, arrange for food delivery and set up a rest area somewhere away from the files. Sir, I really think, Sandra started. That's an order, Sandra. You're no good to me if you collapse in the middle of court. He turned to Claire. You too. 4 hours minimum. I'm fine. You're running on fumes and spite. Both have their limits. He glanced at his watch. It's 3 p.m. I want you back here at 7 p.m., clear-headed and ready to work. That's not a request. The rest area Marcus set up turned out to be a converted conference room with a few couches that looked more comfortable than Claire's apartment bed. She tried to lie down, but her mind wouldn't stop racing. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw contract clauses swimming behind her eyelids, heard Richard Morrison's cold voice making threats she knew he could deliver on. Can't sleep either? Claire opened her eyes to find Keisha sitting on the opposite couch, staring at the ceiling. Too wired, Claire admitted. Same. Keep thinking about Pacific Manufacturing, about all those people who lost their jobs because Morrison and Blake decided to use them as a dumping ground for liability. Keisha sat up. My dad worked manufacturing his whole life, gave 30 years to a company that got bought out by private equity, stripped for parts, and shut down. He never recovered from that. Died thinking he'd failed somehow, like it was his fault he couldn't find another job at 58. I'm sorry. Not your fault. But people like Morrison and Blake, they're the ones who make it possible. They're the ones who turn destroying lives into billable hours. Keisha looked at Claire. That's why I'm here. Not just for the paycheck, because somebody needs to stop them. You think we can? I think you already did once, when you tried to blow the whistle. The fact that they destroyed you for it just means you were onto something real. Claire hadn't thought about it that way. Had spent 3 years viewing her exposure attempt as a failure, a naive mistake that cost her everything. But maybe Keisha was right. Maybe the viciousness of Morrison and Blake's response was proof that she'd gotten too close to something they couldn't afford to have revealed. They're going to come after all of us, Claire said quietly, when this breaks. Morrison and Blake doesn't just fight back. They annihilate. Let them try. Keisha's voice was hard. I'm not my father. I don't break that easy. Claire wanted to warn her, wanted to explain that Morrison and Blake had resources beyond imagination, that they could make evidence appear and disappear, that they had judges and prosecutors and journalists in their pocket. But looking at Keisha's determined face, she realized warnings would be useless. The younger woman had already made her choice. Get some sleep, Claire said. We're going to need it. This time when she closed her eyes, exhaustion won out over anxiety. She fell into a dreamless sleep that felt like falling off a cliff. She woke to Marcus gently shaking her shoulder. 7 p.m., Ms. Bennett. Mr. Vale wants everyone in the main conference room. Claire sat up, her body screaming protests. 4 hours of sleep on a couch had left her with a crick in her neck and the vague feeling of having been hit by a truck. But her mind felt clearer, sharper. The conference room had been transformed. Someone had set up multiple workstations with large monitors, a wall-mounted screen displaying what looked like a timeline, and enough coffee to fuel a small army. Ethan stood at the head of the table, looking like he'd showered and changed while the rest of them slept. Beside him was a woman Claire didn't recognize, early 40s, sharp suit, carrying herself with the quiet confidence of someone used to being the smartest person in the room. This is Dr. Angela Chen, Ethan said, forensic document analyst. She's going to help us prove that Morrison and Blake's contract modifications were intentional rather than accidental. Angela nodded to the group. I've reviewed the 15 contracts you flagged, ran them through pattern recognition software, analyzed font metadata, examined the digital fingerprints of when each section was created and modified. She pulled up an image on the main screen, one of the compromised contracts with the hidden clause highlighted in red. This paragraph was inserted after the main contract was drafted. The metadata shows it was created in a different software version on a different computer and integrated into the document using techniques designed to minimize visual detection. Angela zoomed in on the font. See this? The kerning, the spacing between letters, is slightly different from the surrounding text. Not enough for the human eye to catch, but enough to show up in detailed analysis. How many of the 15 contracts show this pattern? Sandra asked. All of them. Every single one has evidence of post-draft insertion using deliberate camouflage techniques. Angela switched to another slide. But here's where it gets interesting. The modifications all came from the same IP address range, Morrison and Blake's internal network. That proves they did it, Keisha said. It proves the modifications originated from their office, Angela corrected. Whether that's enough to prove intent depends on how their attorneys spin it. They could claim it was quality control, last-minute revisions, normal editing processes. Except normal editing doesn't involve changing font sizes and spacing to hide text, Claire said. Exactly, which is why I dug deeper. Angela pulled up what looked like email logs. I was able to obtain, through entirely legal means, some of Morrison and Blake's internal communications regarding these contracts. Not the contents of the emails, just the metadata showing when they were sent, to whom, and with what subject lines. Claire leaned forward. And there's a pattern. For each of these contracts, about a week before the deal closed, there was a flurry of emails between senior partners using subject lines like final adjustments and last-minute optimizations. Those emails consistently went to a specific group of 3 attorneys. Let me guess, Sandra said. Richard Morrison, James Blake, and Patricia Holloway. Close. Morrison, Blake, and someone named Thomas Chen. No relation, Angela added. These three seem to be the core team handling the insertions. They're careful, never explicitly stating what they're doing in subject lines, but the pattern is consistent across all 15 contracts. Ethan's expression was grim. So we have technical proof that the modifications were deliberate, and we have evidence linking them to specific attorneys at the firm's highest levels. We have circumstantial evidence, Angela corrected. Strong circumstantial evidence. But Morrison and Blake will argue it's not definitive. They'll claim the emails could be about legitimate contract revisions, that the technical anomalies could be explained by their document management systems, that we're connecting dots that don't necessarily form a picture. Then we need more dots, Claire said. Or we need someone on the inside to confirm the picture, Sandra said quietly. Everyone looked at her. You're talking about a whistleblower, Ethan said. Someone currently at Morrison and Blake willing to testify about their practices. It's the only way to turn circumstantial evidence into a smoking gun. We need someone who can say, yes, we deliberately hid these clauses, and here's exactly how and why we did it. Nobody at Morrison and Blake is going to turn on the firm, Claire said. They're too invested, too afraid, too compromised by their own participation. I tried to be that whistleblower, and look how it ended. You tried from the outside after you'd already been marked as an enemy, Sandra pointed out. What if we approach someone who's still inside? Someone who hasn't crossed the line yet but knows what's happening. Like who? Sandra pulled up a personnel list on her tablet. Morrison and Blake employs 347 attorneys. Not all of them are criminals. Some of them are probably just young associates trying to build their careers, unaware of what the senior partners are doing. Or aware, but not directly involved. You want to recruit a mole, Marcus said. His tone suggested he thought this was either brilliant or insane. I want to give someone an exit ramp, a chance to do the right thing before they become too complicit to back out. Sandra looked at Claire. You work there. You know how it operates. Who would be most likely to help us? Claire thought back to her time at Morrison and Blake, thought about the other junior associates, the ones who'd seemed uncomfortable with some of the firm's practices, but too intimidated to speak up. Most of them had moved on by now, either climbing the partnership ladder or leaving for other firms. But there was one person she remembered, a young woman named Lisa Park, who'd started the same year as Claire, who'd expressed private doubts about some of the cases they were handling. They'd been friendly, not quite friends, but friendly enough to share occasional lunches and commiserate about brutal hours. Lisa Park, Claire said, if she's still there, she had a conscience, kept it quiet, but it was there. Can you reach out to her? I haven't spoken to her in 3 years. For all I know, she thinks I'm a criminal like everyone else. Or she thinks you got railroaded and has been waiting for someone to prove it. Sandra was already searching for Lisa Park's current employment. Still at Morrison and Blake, made junior partner last year, specializes in environmental compliance work. That's not a coincidence, Claire said. They probably promoted her specifically to work on these contaminated contracts. Which means she knows, Ethan said. She might not know she knows, but if she's doing environmental compliance work for Holloway Industries and other Morrison and Blake clients, she's seen the patterns. Claire felt her stomach twist. Reaching out to Lisa meant risking exposure, meant potentially giving Morrison and Blake advance warning of their investigation. But Sandra was right. They needed someone on the inside. I'll contact her, Claire said, but we do it carefully. No phones, no emails, nothing Morrison and Blake can monitor. How then? Keisha asked. Claire thought about it. Lisa used to go to a yoga class near Bryant Park every Wednesday evening. Small studio, no corporate accounts, the kind of place that values privacy. If she's still going there, and she was pretty committed to the routine, I could accidentally run into her. That's tomorrow, Marcus said. I know. Morrison and Blake will have people watching you by now. If you make contact with one of their attorneys, they'll know immediately. Not if we make it look natural. I'm a waitress, remember? I'm allowed to take yoga classes. And if I happen to run into an old colleague, that's just coincidence. Marcus didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue. I'll have a team nearby, he said. Discreet surveillance. If anything goes wrong, we pull you out. Agreed. Ethan checked his watch. That gives us just under 24 hours to firm up our evidence before Claire makes contact. Let's use the time. Angela, I want you to keep analyzing those contracts. Find every technical anomaly, every piece of proof that the modifications were intentional. Sandra, work with the paralegals to build a timeline showing exactly when each hidden clause was inserted and what happened to the companies that signed those contracts. Claire, I'll prepare for talking to Lisa, Claire said. Figure out exactly what to say, how much to reveal, what we need from her. And get more sleep, Ethan added. You look like death. Charming. I'm serious. You're the linchpin of this whole operation. If you fall apart, everything falls apart with you. He was right, of course. Claire was running on fumes again, the brief 4-hour nap already feeling like it happened days ago. The next 18 hours blurred together in another marathon of analysis and documentation. Angela found 6 more technical anomalies proving deliberate document manipulation. Sandra built a devastating timeline showing that every company targeted by hidden clauses suffered major financial problems within 2 years of signing. The pattern was undeniable. By Wednesday evening, they had a case that would make any prosecutor's mouth water. 15 contracts, 8 clear victims, technical proof of manipulation, and a timeline showing systematic fraud dating back nearly a decade. But they still needed a witness. Someone who could put a human face on Morrison and Blake's practices, who could testify about the culture of deliberate deception. Claire stood outside the yoga studio at 6:30 p.m., wearing workout clothes that felt foreign after 3 years of waitress uniforms, and trying to look casual despite her racing heart. Marcus's team was somewhere nearby. She'd been briefed on their positions but told not to look for them. Students started arriving around 6:45. Claire recognized the type. Young professionals trying to decompress from brutal workdays. Lawyers and bankers and consultants seeking an hour of peace before going home to emails and client demands. Lisa Park arrived at 6:52, looking older than Claire remembered but still recognizably herself. Same careful posture, same designer yoga mat bag, same expression of quiet determination. Claire waited until Lisa was almost to the door before calling out, "Lisa?" The other woman turned and Claire watched recognition flash across her face, followed immediately by wariness. "Claire Bennett." Lisa's voice was carefully neutral. "I heard you were... I didn't know you were still in the city." "Hard to leave. Rent control apartment." Claire tried for a smile that probably looked as fake as it felt. "I didn't know you still came here. Every Wednesday for 6 years, it's the only thing keeping me sane." Lisa glanced toward the studio door. "I should have coffee with me after?" The words tumbled out before Claire could second-guess them. "Just 15 minutes. I know it's been a while, but I'd like to catch up." Lisa studied her for a long moment. Claire could see the calculation happening, the risk assessment, the evaluation of potential consequences. Lisa had always been careful, always thought 3 moves ahead. "Okay," Lisa said finally. "There's a place across the street. I'll meet you there at 8. The yoga class was torture. Claire hadn't done yoga in years, and her body punished her for every pose. But she pushed through, hyper-aware of Lisa on the mat 2 rows ahead, wondering what the other woman was thinking, whether she'd show up for coffee or just disappear. At 8, Claire sat at a corner table in a small cafe, nursing chamomile tea and trying not to stare at the door. 8:15 came and went. 8:30. Claire was about to give up when Lisa walked in, still wearing her yoga clothes but with a coat thrown over them. She slid into the seat across from Claire without preamble. "I have 20 minutes before Morrison and Blake's surveillance team starts wondering where I am. So whatever you want to say it fast." Claire's stomach dropped. "They're following you?" "They're following everyone these days, ever since the Holloway deal went sideways." Lisa's eyes were hard. "That was you, wasn't it? You're working with Ethan Vale. No point in lying." "Yes." "Do you have any idea what you've done? The partners are losing their minds. Morrison is talking about scorched earth litigation. Blake is calling in favors from every judge he knows. You've kicked a hornet's nest, Claire." "Good. They deserve to be kicked. They're going to destroy you again, worse this time." "Let them try." Claire leaned forward. "Lisa, I need you to listen to me. Really listen. Morrison and Blake is running a systematic fraud operation. They've been hiding liability clauses in contracts for years, destroying companies, ruining lives. And you know about it. You have to know about it if you're doing environmental compliance work for their clients." Lisa's face went carefully blank. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. You're too smart not to have noticed. The patterns, the timing, the way companies keep getting hit with violations they didn't know they were assuming liability for. That's business. Due diligence failures, not fraud. It's fraud when you deliberately hide the clauses using techniques designed to bypass normal reading patterns. It's fraud when you insert them after negotiations are complete. It's fraud when the same three senior partners do it over and over across dozens of deals. Lisa's hands tightened around her coffee cup. Even if that were true, and I'm not saying it is, what do you want from me? You want me to commit career suicide by testifying against my own firm. I want you to stop being complicit in destroying innocent people's lives. I'm not complicit. I do environmental compliance. I help clients understand their obligations. Do you help them understand obligations they don't know they have because Morrison and Blake hid them in contracts? Do you help them navigate liability that was transferred to them through deliberate deception? Lisa stood up abruptly. I can't do this. I can't talk to you. If they find out I was here, they already know you're here, Claire said quietly. Your surveillance team is probably taking pictures right now, so you have a choice. You can go back and tell them I ambushed you, that you refused to cooperate, and hope they believe you. Or you can actually do something about the fraud you've been watching happen for years. There's no fraud. There's aggressive legal strategy, and there's client advocacy, and there's deliberate criminal deception designed to destroy companies for profit, and you know it. Claire pulled a flash drive from her pocket and slid it across the table. On here is technical analysis of 15 contracts showing deliberate manipulation, proof that Morrison and Blake is inserting hidden clauses using techniques I developed and they stole. Proof that this is systematic, institutional, and completely illegal. Lisa stared at the flash drive like it was a bomb. Look at it, Claire said. In private, away from the firm, and then ask yourself if you can keep being part of this. And if I look at it and decide you're wrong, then delete it and forget we talked. But if I'm right, if you see what I see, then you have a choice to make about what kind of lawyer you want to be. Lisa grabbed the flash drive and shoved it in her pocket. I should report this. This conversation, that drive, all of it. The partners would expect me to. But you won't, because part of you has been waiting for someone to prove you're not crazy for having doubts. You don't know me anymore, Claire. I know you spent 3 years at Morrison and Blake watching them operate. I know you're smart enough to have noticed patterns. And I know you're a better person than Richard Morrison or James Blake will ever be. Lisa backed toward the door. Stay away from me. Don't contact me again. I mean it. She left without looking back. Claire sat alone at the cafe, staring at her cold tea and wondering if she'd just made a massive mistake. If Lisa went straight to Morrison with the flash drive, they'd know exactly what evidence Claire and Ethan had compiled. They'd have time to prepare defenses, destroy documents, intimidate witnesses. Marcus appeared at her table 5 minutes later. That looked rough, he said. She took the drive. I saw. Question is whether she'll use it against you or actually look at what's on it. I guess we'll find out. They walked back to Vale Tower in silence. Claire's body ached from the yoga class, and her mind ached from the conversation with Lisa. She'd gambled everything on the hope that her former colleague still had a conscience worth appealing to. Ethan was waiting when they arrived, along with Sandra and the rest of the team. They'd converted the conference room into something resembling a war room, with evidence boards covering every wall and laptops scattered across every surface. How did it go? Ethan asked. She took the flash drive, either to destroy it or to actually review it. We'll know which within 24 hours. That's cutting it close. The hearing is Friday morning. I know. Sandra looked up from her laptop. We may have another problem. Morrison and Blake just filed a motion to have you held in contempt of court, Claire. For what? I'm not party to any proceedings. They're arguing that your previous license suspension included an order barring you from practicing law in any capacity. They claim your work analyzing contracts for Ethan constitutes unauthorized practice and violates that order. Claire felt the room tilt. That's not what the suspension order said. It suspended my license, but it didn't bar me from working as a consultant or analyst. They're claiming it amounts to the same thing, and they filed it with Judge Carver. Of course they did. Carver, who'd rubber-stamped every motion Morrison and Blake filed during Claire's disciplinary hearing. Carver, whose family was financially entangled with the firm. This is a distraction, Ethan said. They're trying to disqualify Claire before Friday's hearing so we can't use her testimony. It's working, Claire said quietly. If Carver issues a contempt order, I'm arrested. Even if we fight it, I'm tied up in legal proceedings instead of helping build our case. Can we get the motion transferred to a different judge? Keisha asked. Sandra shook her head. Not without showing bias, and Morrison and Blake will have anticipated that. They'll argue that judge shopping is proof we know our case is weak. So we're trapped, David said. We're inconvenienced, Ethan corrected. Claire, how much of your analysis is already documented? Most of it. Angela has the technical reports. Sandra has the timeline. The paralegals have the contract breakdowns. I'm not the only person who can testify to what we've found. But you're the only person who can explain the techniques, Sandra said. The contractual camouflage methods. How Morrison and Blake perverted your research into a fraud mechanism. Without you, our case loses its narrative through lying. She was right. The evidence was strong, but Claire was the connection between all the pieces. She was the one who could explain how Morrison and Blake had stolen her work and weaponized it. Without her testimony, they had facts but no story. Then we need Lisa to come through, Claire said. She's a current Morrison and Blake partner doing environmental compliance. If she testifies about the firm's practices, she carries more weight than I do anyway. That's a lot of hope to pin on someone who ran away from you at a coffee shop, Marcus observed. It's the hope we have. Ethan's phone rang. He glanced at it, frowned, then answered. Vale? A pause. When? Another pause. I see. Thank you for the courtesy. He hung up and looked at Claire. That was Judge Carver's clerk. He's scheduled an emergency hearing on Morrison and Blake's contempt motion for tomorrow morning at 9. You're ordered to appear. Tomorrow? They just filed it today. Apparently it's urgent enough to warrant immediate attention. Ethan's voice was dry. Carver is nothing if not responsive to Morrison and Blake's concerns. This is insane. They're rushing this through to prevent us from mounting a proper defense. Which means we mount an improper defense. Sandra, get me every lawyer you know who specializes in disciplinary proceedings. I want someone in that courtroom tomorrow who can argue circles around Morrison and Blake's motion. At this hour? On less than 12 hours' notice? Then I guess you'd better start calling. The next morning found Claire sitting in federal court wearing a borrowed suit that almost fit, flanked by Sandra and a criminal defense attorney named Marcus Washington, no relation to their head of security, who'd agreed to represent her on emergency notice. Morrison and Blake had sent 4 attorneys. Richard Morrison himself sat at their table, looking confident and completely at ease. Judge Carver entered promptly at 9. He was exactly as Claire remembered, mid-60s, white hair, the kind of face that looked naturally stern even when attempting pleasantness. This is a motion regarding Ms. Claire Bennett's compliance with previous court orders, he began. Counsel for Morrison and Blake, proceed. Richard Morrison stood. His voice was smooth, reasonable, the voice of someone explaining obvious truths to confused children. Your Honor, Ms. Bennett was suspended from the practice of law 3 years ago following findings of professional misconduct. The suspension order explicitly barred her from engaging in any legal practice pending completion of ethics requirements. Despite this clear prohibition, Ms. Bennett has been working for Ethan Vale analyzing complex legal contracts, providing legal advice, and engaging in work that constitutes practicing law without a license. Your Honor, Marcus Washington interrupted. The suspension order Ms. Bennett agreed to suspended her law license. It did not bar her from working as a paralegal, legal consultant, or contract analyst. Ms. Bennett has been careful to operate within the bounds of she's been doing substantive legal analysis, Morrison cut in, making legal determinations about contract validity, advising Mr. Vale on legal strategy, performing work that requires a law license. Contract analysis doesn't require a law license, Washington argued. Thousands of business consultants, analysts, and advisors perform similar work every day without being licensed attorneys. Judge Carver held up a hand. Ms. Bennett, you're present. I'd like to hear from you directly. Have you been practicing law in violation of your suspension order? Claire stood, her legs steadier than she expected. No, Your Honor. I've been analyzing contracts for technical features, font sizes, spacing, formatting irregularities. That's document analysis, not legal practice. And providing opinions on whether those irregularities constitute contractual fraud? I've been providing factual observations about document construction. What legal conclusions Mr. Vale's attorneys draw from those observations is their decision. not mine. Morrison smiled. Your Honor, Ms. Bennett is playing semantic games. The courtroom door opened. Lisa Park walked in. She was wearing a Morrison and Blake suit, the expensive kind the firm provided to partners, and carrying a briefcase. But she wasn't walking toward Morrison's table. She was walking toward the judge. Your Honor, she said, I apologize for the interruption, but I have information relevant to these proceedings. Information about Morrison and Blake's true motivations for filing this contempt motion. Carver's expression went from stern to confused. You are? Lisa Park, junior partner at Morrison and Blake. Or I was until about 2 hours ago when I resigned. She set her briefcase on Washington's table. I'm here to testify about the firm's systematic fraud operations and their use of contractual camouflage techniques to defraud clients. Techniques that were developed by Claire Bennett and stolen by Morrison and Blake after they destroyed her career to prevent her from exposing their criminal practices. The courtroom went dead silent. Richard Morrison had gone pale. Your Honor, Ms. Park is clearly having some kind of breakdown. This is inappropriate, is it? Lisa turned to face him. Is it inappropriate to tell the truth about what you've been doing? About the 15 contracts I personally reviewed that contained hidden liability clauses? About the internal memos describing how to insert those clauses without detection? About the partner meetings where you and Blake and Chen discussed which clients to target next? You're making defamatory accusations based on evidence I copied before I resigned, evidence that's now in the hands of the U.S. Attorney's Office, the State Bar Disciplinary Board, and several journalists I trust. Lisa's voice was steady, cold. You should have been more careful about what you put in writing, Richard. Email feels informal, but it's still documentary evidence. Carver was staring at Lisa like she'd sprouted a second head. Ms. Park, are you stating under oath that Morrison and Blake has been engaging in fraudulent practices? I'm stating under oath that Morrison and Blake has been running a criminal enterprise disguised as a law firm, and I'm offering to testify about everything I've witnessed in exchange for immunity from prosecution for my own peripheral involvement. Morrison was on his feet. Your Honor, this is clearly a coordinated attack orchestrated by Mr. Vale and Miss Bennett to expose you, Lisa interrupted, which is exactly what you're afraid of. That's why you filed this frivolous contempt motion, not because Claire violated any court order, but because you need to discredit her before she can testify about what you did to her and what you've been doing to others. Carver looked at Morrison, looked at Lisa, looked at Claire. I'm going to need some time to process this, he said finally. Court is adjourned pending further review. Ms. Park, you'll make yourself available for questioning by the appropriate authorities. Mr. Morrison, you and your colleagues will remain in the jurisdiction. Ms. Bennett, he paused. The contempt motion is denied pending investigation of these additional matters. The gavel came down. Richard Morrison looked like a man watching his empire collapse in real time. Lisa caught Claire's eye across the courtroom and gave the smallest nod. Claire nodded back, understanding flowing between them without words. Sometimes the courage to speak up didn't come all at once. Sometimes it built slowly, over years of watching wrongdoing and hating yourself for staying silent. Sometimes all it took was one person reaching out to remind you that you didn't have to be complicit forever. Outside the courthouse, Ethan was waiting with Marcus and Sandra. Lisa came through, Claire said simply. I heard. Word travels fast when a major law firm implodes in open court. Ethan's smile was fierce. Morrison and Blake just became the biggest legal story in the country. They'll fight back. Let them. We have everything we need now. Evidence, testimony, pattern, documentation. And more importantly, we have their own partner confirming what they did. Claire looked back at the courthouse, where reporters were already gathering after word of Lisa's dramatic testimony spread. It's not over, she said. No, Ethan agreed. But we just won the most important battle. Everything else is cleanup. Claire thought about the last 3 years, about serving food to people who never saw her, about the shame and fear and constant sense of being hunted, about the woman she'd been before Morrison and Blake destroyed her, and the woman she was becoming now. I want my law license back, she said. Then we'll get it back, Ethan replied, right after we finish burning Morrison and Blake to the ground. The media storm hit before they'd even made it back to Vale Tower. Claire's phone started buzzing with notifications, news alerts, social media mentions, messages from numbers she didn't recognize. By the time they stepped into the elevator, Every major outlet was running some version of the same headline. Prestigious law firm accused of systematic fraud. Turn it off, Ethan said, nodding at her phone. I should see what they're saying. You should breathe for 5 minutes before the next wave hits. He pulled out his own phone and powered it down. Trust me, the news will still be there in an hour. It'll probably be worse. He was right, of course. Claire silenced her phone and leaned against the elevator wall, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The adrenaline that had carried her through the courtroom was draining away, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. Lisa took a hell of a risk, Sandra said. Morrison and Blake will come after her with everything they have. They'll try, Ethan said. But she was smart. Going to the U.S. attorney first, copying evidence before she resigned. She built herself a lifeboat before jumping ship. Still, she threw away a partnership, a career, everything she worked for. She threw away a career built on fraud, Claire corrected. There's a difference. The elevator doors opened to chaos. The 47th floor looked like a campaign headquarters on election night. People rushing between offices, phones ringing constantly, the wall-mounted screens all tuned to different news channels, showing various angles of the Morrison and Blake story. Keisha spotted them first. You're back! We've been fielding calls all morning. Reporters, other law firms, companies that signed contracts with Morrison and Blake, wanting to know if they've been defrauded. How many companies? Ethan asked. 34 so far, and that's just in the last 2 hours. David appeared with a tablet. The State Bar just announced they're opening an investigation into Morrison and Blake's practices, and the SEC is making noises about potential securities fraud if any of the compromised deals involved publicly traded companies. Which several of them did, Sandra said. This is going to get ugly. Good, Ethan said. Let it get ugly. Morrison and Blake has been operating with impunity for too long. A new voice cut through the noise. Mr. Vale, I need 5 minutes. Claire turned to see a woman in her early 30s with tired eyes and a recording device already in her hand. A press badge identified her as Jennifer Torres, New York Times. How did you get up here? Marcus appeared from nowhere, positioning himself between the reporter and Ethan. Same way everyone else did. Elevator. Torres didn't look intimidated. Mr. Vale, can you confirm that you're planning to file criminal complaints against Morrison and Blake? No comment at this time, Ethan said. What about you, Miss Bennett? Torres turned to Claire. 3 years ago, Morrison and Blake destroyed your career. How does it feel to be vindicated? Claire opened her mouth, but Sandra cut her off. Ms. Bennett won't be making statements to the press. All inquiries should go through Vale Industries Communications Department. With respect, Ms. Bennett isn't employed by Vale Industries. She's a consultant, which means she can speak for herself. Torres's eyes were sharp, intelligent. I've been investigating Morrison and Blake for 2 years. I know what they did to you. I know about the forged evidence, the manufactured witnesses, the way they systematically destroyed anyone who threatened to expose them. I want to help tell that story. Then file a FOIA request like everyone else, Sandra said. I'm not looking for documents. I'm looking for truth. Torres focused on Claire. You tried to blow the whistle 3 years ago and they buried you. Now you have a chance to make people hear what you tried to say. Don't waste it. She said no comment, Marcus said, his voice carrying warning. Torres held up her hands. Fine, but my offer stands. When you're ready to talk, I'm ready to listen. She pulled out a business card and set it on the nearest desk. I don't work for Morrison and Blake. I don't owe them anything, and I don't forget the people they destroy. She left before anyone could respond. We need better security, Marcus muttered. We need a communication strategy, Sandra corrected. This story is going to dominate news cycles for weeks. We need to control the narrative before Morrison and Blake does. They're already trying, Keisha said, pointing at one of the screens. A Morrison and Blake spokesman was giving a statement from the firm's headquarters, looking appropriately grave and concerned. Claire moved closer to listen. Deeply troubled by these baseless accusations. Morrison and Blake has served clients with integrity for over a century. The allegations made this morning by a former junior partner appear to stem from a personnel dispute rather than any legitimate concerns about firm practices. We are cooperating fully with all appropriate authorities and expect to be completely vindicated. Personnel dispute, Claire said. They're already trying to paint Lisa as a disgruntled employee. Standard playbook, Sandra agreed. discredit the whistleblower, deny everything, act shocked that anyone would question their integrity. Will it work? Depends on how much evidence Lisa actually provided. If she has documentation, emails, internal memos, proof of the systematic fraud, Morrison and Blake is finished. If it's just her word against theirs, they might survive. She has evidence, Claire said. I saw her face in that courtroom. She wouldn't have burned her entire career on a bluff. Ethan's phone rang, the office line, not his cell. He answered, listened for a moment, then his expression changed. Put him through. A pause. Victor? What an unexpected pleasure. Everyone went quiet. Ethan put the phone on speaker. Victor Holloway's voice filled the room, tight with barely controlled fury. You've made a serious mistake, Vale. Have I? I was under the impression that I avoided a serious mistake, thanks to some timely intervention. You think destroying Morrison and Blake helps you? You think exposing this fraud makes you look smart? All you've done is crater your own reputation. Anyone who looks at this situation sees a billionaire so desperate to back out of a deal that he manufactured a scandal. The scandal was already there. I just found it. You fabricated evidence with a disgraced attorney who has every reason to lie about my legal representation. And now you've convinced another attorney to commit career suicide by making wild accusations. That's not exposing fraud. That's conspiracy. Interesting theory. You should present it to the U.S. attorney. I'm sure they'd love to hear it. Don't be smug. You have no idea what you've started. Victor's voice dropped. I've been in business for 40 years. I've survived recessions, hostile takeovers, and government investigations. I will survive this. But you? You're young, inexperienced, and you just made powerful enemies. Enemies who know how to destroy people. Like they destroyed Claire Bennett? Silence on the other end. See, that's the problem with your strategy, Victor. You keep threatening to do things you've already done. We know Morrison and Blake destroys people. We know they fabricate evidence and manipulate proceedings. We know because they did it before, which means we're ready for it this time. You're not ready for anything. You're playing in leagues you don't understand. Then I guess we'll learn together. Thanks for the call, Victor. Give my regards to your attorneys. Oh, wait. I suppose you'll need new ones now. Ethan hung up. That was risky, Sandra said, taunting him like that. He was going to come after us anyway. Might as well make him angry enough to get sloppy. Ethan looked at Claire. How fast can Morrison and Blake mobilize a counterattack? Fast. They'll have already assembled a crisis team. By end of day, they'll have private investigators digging into everyone involved in exposing them. By tomorrow, they'll start leaking damaging information about their accusers. What kind of information? Whatever they can find or fabricate. Financial problems, personal scandals, professional mistakes. Anything that shifts focus away from their fraud and onto the people exposing it. So we need to get ahead of it, Ethan said. Sandra, I want background checks on everyone in this building. I want to know what skeletons Morrison and Blake might find before they find them. Including you? Especially me. The next 72 hours proved Claire's predictions accurate. Morrison and Blake didn't just fight back. They went nuclear. Stories started appearing in business journals questioning Ethan's business practices, suggesting he'd used questionable tactics to build his empire. Anonymous sources claimed Claire had a history of making false accusations against employers. Someone leaked Lisa Park's personnel file, highlighting every minor mistake she'd made during her tenure at the firm. They're trying to bury us in garbage, Keisha said, scrolling through the latest batch of negative stories. Make people so confused about who's telling the truth that they stop caring. It's working, David added. Look at social media. Half the comments are defending Morrison and Blake, saying this is just a witch hunt by competitors. Claire sat in Rebecca's old office. Her office now, she supposed, though it still felt like borrowing someone else's life, staring at her laptop screen. The attacks were personal and vicious. Former colleagues from Morrison and Blake were giving interviews about her ethical lapses and tendency toward paranoid accusations. Someone had found her sealed disciplinary records and leaked selective quotes that made her sound unstable. A knock on the door. Ethan entered without waiting for a response. You okay? I've been better. Claire gestured at her screen. They're painting me as a conspiracy theorist with a grudge. Some of these articles make me sound genuinely unhinged. Anyone who matters knows better. Do they? Or do they just know I'm useful for your purposes right now? The words came out harsher than she intended. Ethan closed the door and sat across from her. You think I'm using you? I think you needed someone who understood Morrison and Blake's techniques, and I happen to be conveniently destroyed by them. That made me perfect for your purposes. And the fact that I believe you? That I'm spending millions fighting a battle that technically isn't mine? What does that make me? Claire didn't have an answer. I could have signed that contract, Ethan continued. Could have let the trap spring, dealt with the fallout later, maybe sued Morrison and Blake for fraud. That's what most executives would do. Sign first, fight later. But I didn't. Because you spoke up. Because you risked everything to warn a stranger about a trap. I didn't risk everything. I had nothing left to risk. You risked becoming visible again. You risked being attacked again. You risked dredging up everything Morrison and Blake did to you. Ethan leaned forward. You think that's nothing? I think I was tired of being a coward. You were never a coward. You were surviving. He pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. Look at this. It was an email from someone named Patricia Chen, one of the companies they'd identified as a Morrison and Blake fraud victim. The message was simple. Thank you for exposing what happened to us. We thought we were alone, knowing others were targeted too, that this was systematic rather than our failure that changes everything. I've gotten 43 emails like this in the last 2 days, Ethan said. People thanking us. Companies that thought they'd failed, that blamed themselves for missing the trap. Now they know the truth. That changes things for them. Claire felt something crack in her chest. She'd been so focused on the attacks, the negative stories, the ways Morrison and Blake was trying to destroy her credibility again, that she hadn't thought about the people they were helping. It doesn't make the attacks hurt less, she said quietly. No, but it makes them worth enduring. Ethan stood. I need to show you something. Come with me. He led her down the hallway to a conference room she hadn't been in before. Inside, the walls were covered with photographs and news clippings. Rebecca started this, Ethan said. She called it her impact wall. Every person she helped as an attorney, every case she won that made a difference. She documented it. She said it was important to remember that the work mattered, especially on days when it felt like nothing mattered. Claire studied the wall. Families who'd won wrongful death suits, workers who'd successfully sued for discrimination, patients who'd held pharmaceutical companies accountable for harmful drugs. Dozens of faces, each representing a life changed. I stopped updating it after she died, Ethan admitted. Couldn't bring myself to touch it, but last night I added something new. He pointed to a recent addition, a printout of Patricia Chen's email, surrounded by similar messages from other Morrison and Blake victims. This is your impact, Claire, not the garbage Morrison and Blake is spreading about you. This, real people whose lives are better because you spoke up. Claire's eyes stung. She blinked hard, refusing to cry in front of Ethan. I want to add something else, he continued. I want to document every company we identify as a Morrison and Blake victim. Every person whose career they destroyed. Every life they damaged. I want this wall to show the full scope of what we uncovered. Why? Because 3 years from now, when all this is over and Morrison and Blake is gone, I want you to be able to walk in here and remember that it mattered. That you mattered. A knock interrupted them. Sandra appeared in the doorway, looking grim. We have a problem. Judge Carver just unsealed portions of Claire's old disciplinary records. The parts Morrison and Blake wants public. Can he do that? Claire asked. Apparently. His order claims it's in the interest of transparency given the current investigations. Sandra's expression said exactly what she thought of that justification. The media has it now. It's going to be everywhere by tonight. Claire felt sick. Those records contained her lowest moments, the accusations, the forged evidence, her desperate attempts to defend herself, the final broken agreement to accept suspension. Seeing them exposed would be like having her worst nightmare broadcast on every screen in the city. How bad? Ethan asked. Bad. They make her look guilty. That's the point. Sandra looked at Claire. I'm sorry. We're filing objections, but the damage is already done. Then we need to get ahead of it, Ethan said. Claire, remember that reporter from the Times, Jennifer Torres? The one who ambushed us? The one who said she wanted to tell the truth. Maybe it's time we let her. Claire thought about it, about the risk of going public, of putting herself out there to be torn apart by Morrison and Blake's narrative machine. But then she thought about the impact wall, about the families and companies who'd reached out to say thank you. Okay, she said, let's talk to her. Jennifer Torres arrived at Vale Tower within an hour, moving through the building with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what story she was chasing. Ethan had arranged for them to meet in a small conference room, neutral territory, Marcus standing just outside the door. Thank you for agreeing to this, Torres said, setting up her recording device. I know it's not easy. Easy stopped being an option a long time ago, Claire replied. Then let's start at the beginning. Tell me about Morrison and Blake. Not the fraud we're hearing about now, the fraud they committed against you 3 years ago. So Claire told her. Everything. The idealistic young attorney who'd thought she could make a difference. The techniques she had developed to identify contractual vulnerabilities. The moment she discovered senior partners using her work to commit fraud. The speed with which Morrison and Blake turned on her, manufacturing evidence and witnesses, destroying her career before she could expose them. They were efficient, Claire said. I'll give them that. Within a week, I went from rising star to criminal. Within a month, I couldn't find anyone willing to hire me. Within 6 months, I was working minimum wage just to eat. And you never fought back? I tried, for a year, until I ran out of money and options and hope. Claire met Torres's eyes. You want to know what it's like to be destroyed by people with unlimited resources? It's like drowning in slow motion. Every time you think you've reached the surface, they push you back under. Eventually, you stop trying to breathe. What changed? Ethan Vale asked me to sign a contract. She explained about that night at Aurelius, about recognizing the hidden clause, about the impossible choice between safety and courage, about speaking up despite every instinct screaming at her to stay invisible. I thought I was saving him, Claire said. Turns out I was saving myself, too. Torres scribbled notes. Morrison and Blake is claiming this is all fabricated, that you're a disgraced attorney with a grudge, that Lisa Park is mentally unstable, that Ethan Vale is manipulating evidence to avoid a deal gone bad. What do you say to that? I say they're following their playbook. Discredit the accusers, deny everything, play victim. It worked 3 years ago. They're hoping it works again. And if it does? Claire thought about the impact wall, about the messages from grateful companies, about Lisa Park throwing away her career to tell the truth. Then at least we tried. That's more than I can say for the last 3 years. The interview lasted 2 hours. Torres asked sharp questions, pushed back on inconsistencies, demanded evidence for every claim. By the end, Claire felt wrung out but oddly lighter. She'd told her story. The real story, not the version Morrison and Blake had created. One more question, Torres said as she packed up her equipment. What do you want to happen now? I want Morrison and Blake shut down. I want Richard Morrison and his partners to face criminal charges. I want every company they defrauded to get justice. Claire paused. And I want my law license back. Not because I need it, but because they took it from me through fraud, and I want them to admit it. That's a lot to want. I've earned the right to want a lot. Torres smiled. Yeah, I think you have. The article ran 3 days later on the front page of the Times' business section, accompanied by a damning investigation into Morrison and Blake's practices. Torres had done her homework. She'd found additional victims, obtained internal documents, interviewed former employees who corroborated Lisa's testimony. The piece was thorough, brutal, and impossible to dismiss as tabloid journalism. By noon, the U.S. Attorney's Office had announced a formal investigation into Morrison and Blake. By evening, 3 more junior partners had resigned and offered to cooperate with authorities. By midnight, Morrison and Blake had issued a statement announcing they were suspending operations pending an internal review. They're done, Sandra said, watching the news coverage. Even if they avoid criminal charges, the reputational damage is terminal. No client will trust them again. Good, Ethan said simply. Claire stood at the window overlooking Manhattan, watching lights flicker across the city. Somewhere down there, Richard Morrison was probably in an emergency meeting with crisis management specialists. Victor Holloway was probably calling in favors from politicians. Judge Carver was probably regretting his decision to unseal her disciplinary records, which had backfired spectacularly when Torres used them to show exactly how Morrison and Blake had destroyed her. What are you thinking? Ethan asked, coming to stand beside her. That I should feel happier, more vindicated, something. Claire pressed her hand against the cold glass. But mostly, I just feel tired. Revenge isn't as satisfying as people think. Is that what this is? Revenge? It's justice. There's a difference. Ethan glanced at her. But justice still leaves you hollow sometimes, because it can't give you back the 3 years they took. It can't undo the damage. Rebecca, Claire said, you're talking about Rebecca. I'm talking about loss, about how winning doesn't always feel like winning when you know what it costs to get there. They stood in silence for a moment, two people who'd both lost things that couldn't be recovered. I have a daughter, Ethan said finally. Sophie, she's 7. Smart, stubborn, absolutely terrifying when she's determined to get her way. I've seen her picture. She asked me yesterday why the news keeps showing our building, why reporters want to talk to me, why people keep calling me a hero. He smiled faintly. I told her we helped catch some bad people. She wanted to know if that made us superheroes. What did you say? I said no. We're just people who decided to speak up when we saw something wrong. That's not superhero stuff. That's just being human. She's lucky to have you. She'd be luckier to have her mother, but we work with what we've got. Ethan turned from the window. Morrison and Blake is falling apart. The investigations will take months, maybe years, but we've done what we set out to do. We've exposed them. So now comes the hard part. What's the hard part? Figuring out what comes next. For you. Claire hadn't let herself think that far ahead. Had been so focused on surviving each day, each attack, each crisis, that the future felt like an abstract concept. I don't know what comes next, she admitted. Then maybe it's time to figure it out. Ethan pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. I had Sandra draw this up. She said to tell you it's non-negotiable, so don't bother arguing. Claire opened the envelope. Inside was a contract, employment agreement, consultant retainer. She wasn't sure which. The numbers made her eyes widen. This is too much. It's exactly right. You saved my company from a multi-billion-dollar fraud. You helped expose a criminal enterprise. You risked everything to tell the truth. That's worth compensation. I can't accept this. You can and you will, because you're going to need capital to rebuild your career, and I'm not about to let you do it working minimum wage jobs. His voice softened. Claire, you spent 3 years invisible because Morrison and Blake made you afraid to be seen. It's time to stop being afraid. I don't know how. Then learn. Starting with this. He gestured at the contract. Take the money. Use it to fight for your law license. Use it to start your own practice if you want. Use it to take 6 months off and remember what it feels like to breathe without looking over your shoulder. Just stop apologizing for existing. Claire looked at the contract, at the numbers that represented more than she'd earned in the last 3 years combined. Looked at Ethan, at this man who'd believed her when he had no reason to. Okay, she said, I'll take it. Good. Now get out of my building. Take a shower, sleep in a real bed, eat something that isn't takeout. That's also non-negotiable. Claire left Vale Tower at midnight, stepping out into Manhattan air that felt different somehow. Cleaner. Or maybe she just felt different. Lighter, despite the exhaustion. Her phone buzzed. A text from Lisa Park, the first communication since the courthouse. Saw the Times article. You did good. We did good. Coffee sometime? Claire typed back. Yeah, sometime. She walked home through streets that felt less threatening than they had a week ago. The city hadn't changed, but she had. The invisible waitress was gone, replaced by someone who'd remembered she had a voice worth using. It wasn't a complete victory. Morrison and Blake's attacks had left scars. The disciplinary records being unsealed had humiliated her. The media coverage had exposed parts of her life she'd wanted to keep buried. But she'd survived. More than survived. She'd fought back. And tomorrow, she'd start figuring out what came next. 6 months later, Claire stood in front of a mirror adjusting a suit that actually belonged to her this time. Not borrowed from Sandra's closet or purchased in a panicked rush before a court appearance. The reflection looking back at her was familiar, but different. Same face, same dark hair, now cut shorter, and more professional, but different eyes. Eyes that didn't automatically look down when meeting someone's gaze. You ready? Lisa Park appeared in the doorway of the small office they'd been renting in a building 3 blocks from Vale Tower. The State Bar Disciplinary Committee doesn't like to be kept waiting. I've been ready for 3 years, Claire said. Another 5 minutes won't kill me. The hearing to reinstate her law license had been scheduled and rescheduled 4 times, as Morrison and Blake's implosion created cascading legal chaos. 53 criminal indictments across 15 states, hundreds of civil lawsuits from defrauded companies, a complete restructuring of legal ethics oversight in New York. The firm that had existed for over a century was being systematically dismantled, its assets liquidated to pay victims, its partners facing prison time. Richard Morrison himself was currently out on bail awaiting trial for racketeering, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The last Claire had heard, he'd aged 10 years and 6 months. She didn't feel sorry for him. "You know they're going to reinstate you," Lisa said. "The evidence is overwhelming. Morrison and Blake fabricated everything against you. Knowing something and hearing it are different things." Claire grabbed her briefcase. Leather, expensive. Another purchase made possible by Ethan's insistence on properly compensating her. "Let's go." The disciplinary committee met in a building that had haunted Claire's nightmares for 3 years. Walking through those doors felt like confronting a ghost, except this time she wasn't alone. Lisa walked beside her, and waiting in the lobby was Ethan, who'd insisted on attending despite having a board meeting he was supposed to be chairing. "You didn't have to come," Claire said. "I know. I wanted to." He stood, straightening his tie. "Besides, Sophie wanted me to give you this." He handed Claire a folded piece of paper. She opened it to find a crayon drawing of a woman in a cape with "Super Lawyer Claire" written across the top in careful 7-year-old handwriting. "She's been working on it all week," Ethan said. "Apparently you're her favorite superhero now, tied with Spider-Man." Claire felt her throat tighten. She'd met Sophie twice, once when the girl had shown up unexpectedly at Vale Tower on a school holiday, and once at a small dinner Ethan had invited her to. Both times, Sophie had peppered her with questions about being a lawyer, about standing up to bad people, about what it felt like to be brave. Claire hadn't known how to tell a 7-year-old that bravery mostly felt like being terrified and doing it anyway. "Tell her thank you," Claire said, carefully folding the drawing and tucking it into her briefcase. "Tell her yourself. She's planning to interrogate you about the hearing later. Fair warning, she's been watching a lot of courtroom dramas and her expectations are wildly unrealistic." The hearing itself was anticlimactic in the way that vindication often is. The committee chair, a stern woman named Margaret Holloway, no relation to Victor, she'd assured them, reviewed the evidence methodically. Forensic analysis proving the documents used against Claire had been fabricated. Testimony from Lisa and other Morrison and Blake whistleblowers confirming the firm's systematic destruction of Claire's career. Expert analysis of how the original disciplinary proceedings had been manipulated. "Ms. Bennett," Margaret said when the presentation concluded, "the committee has reviewed your petition for reinstatement along with the substantial evidence of prosecutorial misconduct in your original disciplinary case. We find that the suspension of your license was obtained through fraud and misrepresentation. Accordingly, your license to practice law in the state of New York is hereby reinstated effective immediately, with a formal apology from this committee for the injustice you suffered." The words Claire had waited 3 years to hear landed with unexpected gentleness. She'd imagined this moment countless times, imagined crying or laughing or feeling some overwhelming surge of emotion. Instead, she just felt tired and relieved, like putting down a weight she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. "Thank you," she managed. "We're also recommending that the State Bar Association conduct a comprehensive review of disciplinary procedures to prevent similar abuses in the future," Margaret continued. "Your case has exposed significant vulnerabilities in our oversight systems. That's on us to fix." After the hearing, they went to a small cafe near Bryant Park that Lisa had discovered during her Morrison and Blake days. It was the same place where Claire had handed Lisa the flash drive, where she'd gambled everything on the hope that her old colleague still had a conscience. "Feels different now, doesn't it?" Lisa said, ordering coffee without the nervous edge she'd had 6 months ago. "Coming here not scared out of our minds." "Everything feels different," Claire agreed. Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and smiled. "Sophie wants to know if you won. I'm apparently supposed to text her the instant we know." "Tell her yes," Claire said, "and that I'll answer all her questions later." "She'll hold you to that. Kid has a memory like a steel trap." He typed out a response, then looked at Claire. "So, lawyer again. What are you going to do with it?" It was the question Claire had been avoiding thinking about too hard. Being a lawyer had once meant everything to her: identity, purpose, validation. Then it had been taken away, and she'd learned to be someone else. Someone smaller, quieter, less visible. Getting it back didn't automatically return her to the person she'd been before. "I don't know," she admitted. "I thought I would know. Thought I'd have this whole plan ready to go. But now that it's real, I'm just blank." "That's fair," Lisa said. "You've spent 3 years in survival mode. Actual choices take time to process." "I have been thinking about something," Claire said slowly. "All those companies Morrison and Blake defrauded, they're going to need help navigating the fallout. Understanding what was done to them, fighting for compensation, restructuring to prevent it happening again. That's specialized work that requires understanding both the legal framework and the fraud techniques." "You want to help them," Ethan said. "I want to build something that prevents this from happening to other people. Morrison and Blake wasn't an anomaly. There are other firms out there using similar techniques, other victims who don't know they've been defrauded." Claire looked at Lisa. "We could do that. Build a practice specifically focused on contractual fraud prevention and victim advocacy." Lisa set down her coffee cup carefully. "Are you asking me to go into business with you? I'm suggesting we might be good at it, together." "I've been at this for 6 months, and I'm already exhausted. The lawsuits, the investigations, the constant media attention. I'm not sure I want to spend the rest of my career reliving Morrison and Blake's crimes. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting we use what we learned to build something better, something that helps people before they become victims instead of just cleaning up after." Claire pulled out her phone and showed them a document she'd been working on. "Look, contract analysis as a service. We review major deals before they close, specifically looking for hidden liability transfers, camouflaged clauses, structural fraud. We teach companies how to protect themselves." Ethan leaned in to read. "This is good, really good. You've thought this through." "I've had 6 months and a lot of sleepless nights." Claire looked at Lisa. "You don't have to decide now, but think about it. We could actually make a difference." "I'll think about it," Lisa promised. They talked for another hour, the conversation drifting from business plans to Morrison and Blake's ongoing collapse to Sophie's apparently extensive questions about legal procedure. Claire found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in years, laughing at Ethan's stories about his daughter's latest schemes, debating case law with Lisa like they used to do during law school study sessions. It felt normal. Not perfect, not without the scars of what they'd all been through, but normal in the way that mattered, like she was allowed to exist without apologizing for it. Walking back to her apartment that evening, Claire's phone rang. Unknown number, but she'd stopped being afraid of unknown numbers. Morrison and Blake's worst attacks were behind her. "Claire Bennett," she answered. "Ms. Bennett, this is James Chen from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Do you have a moment?" Her stomach tightened reflexively before she reminded herself this wasn't 3 years ago. The U.S. Attorney's Office wasn't calling to threaten her. They were prosecuting Morrison and Blake. "Of course. What can I do for you?" "We're preparing for the Morrison trial, Richard Morrison specifically. We'd like you to testify about the firm's practices and their treatment of you. I know you've already provided deposition testimony, but having you on the stand during trial would significantly strengthen our case." Claire stopped walking. Testifying meant facing Richard Morrison in court, meant being cross-examined by whatever high-powered defense attorneys he'd managed to hire, meant reliving the worst period of her life in excruciating public detail. "When?" she asked. "Trial starts in 3 months. You'd likely testify in the second week." "I'll do it." "You don't want time to think about it?" "I've had 3 years to think about it. The answer is yes." Chen sounded relieved. "Thank you, Ms. Bennett. We'll be in touch with details. And congratulations on your license reinstatement. I saw the news." After hanging up, Claire stood on the sidewalk watching traffic flow past, feeling the city pulse around her. Somewhere in this city, Richard Morrison was preparing his defense, probably still convinced he could talk his way out of consequences. Somewhere, companies were reviewing contracts Morrison and Blake had drafted, discovering frauds that had been invisible until now. Somewhere, young lawyers were learning that the system wasn't infallible, that powerful people could be held accountable. Her phone buzzed with the text from Ethan. "Sophie wants to know if you're free for dinner Saturday. She has 17 questions prepared. I told her that's excessive. She said it's actually a reasonable number, and I don't understand how investigations work. Claire smiled and typed back, "Tell her I'll answer all 17, as long as she answers one question for me." Which is, does she think being brave means not being scared, or being scared and doing it anyway? A pause, then. She says, obviously, the second one. Because if you're not scared, you're not really being brave. You're just not paying attention to how dangerous things are. I'm both proud and concerned about how her mind works. She's going to be terrifying when she grows up. She's terrifying now. Saturday at 6? I'll be there. The next 3 months passed in a blur of preparation. Claire worked with the U.S. Attorney's Office to build the strongest possible case against Richard Morrison. She met with Lisa twice a week to develop their business plan, refining their vision of a practice dedicated to preventing corporate fraud. She had coffee with Jennifer Torres, who was writing a book about the Morrison and Blake scandal and wanted Claire's perspective. And she had dinner with Ethan and Sophie every Saturday, answering the girls' endless questions about law and justice and whether bad people ever really got punished. Sometimes, Claire told her honestly one evening while Ethan was in the kitchen making dessert. Not always, not as often as they should, but sometimes. Did the bad people who hurt you get punished? Sophie asked. They're being punished now. It took a long time, but it's happening. Good. Sophie considered this. Daddy says you were very brave, that you spoke up even when you were scared. I was terrified. But you did it anyway. Yeah, I did it anyway. That's what heroes do, Sophie said matter-of-factly. In all the stories, heroes are scared, but they do the thing anyway because it's right. Claire thought about that, about the 3 years she'd spent hiding, convinced she wasn't brave enough to fight back, about the moment in the Constellation Room when invisibility finally broke and courage won, about every choice since then, small and large, to keep fighting instead of disappearing again. Can I tell you a secret? Claire said. Sophie leaned in conspiratorially. Yes. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like I was barely surviving. Most days I felt like a coward who was too scared to do anything important. But you weren't a coward. You were gathering evidence and waiting for the right moment. I was serving food and trying not to cry in restaurant bathrooms. Sophie frowned, clearly trying to reconcile this with her understanding of heroism. But you still stopped the bad people eventually, so maybe being a hero doesn't mean you feel brave all the time. Maybe it just means you eventually do the right thing, even if it takes a while to work up to it. Out of the mouths of 7-year-olds, Claire thought. You're pretty smart, you know that? Daddy says I get it from my mom. She was very smart and very brave. She fought cancer for a long time, even though she was scared. Your dad told me about her. She sounds amazing. She was. I miss her. Sophie said it simply, the way children do, acknowledging pain without drowning in it. But Daddy says she'd be proud of what you did, standing up to the bad lawyers. She didn't like bullies. Ethan returned with ice cream before Claire could figure out how to respond to that. But later, as she was leaving, he walked her to the elevator. Sophie really looks up to you, he said. I hope that's okay. I know you didn't sign up to be a role model. It's okay. She's a good kid. You're doing something right. Mostly stumbling through it and hoping I don't screw her up too badly. He paused. Rebecca would have liked you. You remind me of her sometimes. The way you fight for what's right, even when it costs you. I ran away for 3 years. You survived for 3 years. Then you came back fighting. That's not weakness. That's strategy. Ethan's expression turned serious. I know the trial is coming up. I know that's going to be hard. If you need anything, I know. Thank you. I'm serious, Claire. You don't have to face this alone. She looked at him. This man who'd believed a waitress's warning when he had every reason not to, who'd spent millions fighting a battle that wasn't technically his, who'd given her back the resources to rebuild her life. I'm not alone, she said. That's the whole point. 3 years ago, I was alone. Now I'm not. That changes everything. The trial of Richard Morrison began on a cold Tuesday in March. The courthouse steps were packed with reporters, protesters holding signs both supporting and condemning Morrison, and curious onlookers hoping for a glimpse of legal drama. Claire entered through a side entrance, escorted by federal marshals who'd been assigned to protect witnesses. Lisa was already inside, along with 11 other former Morrison and Blake employees who'd agreed to testify. They sat together in a witness room, not talking much, each lost in their own thoughts about the firm that had employed them and the crimes they'd witnessed. When Claire's name was called, she walked into the courtroom with her head up and her hands steady. Richard Morrison sat at the defense table looking smaller than she remembered, his expensive suit unable to hide the weight he'd lost or the exhaustion in his eyes. He looked at her once as she took the stand. She met his gaze and didn't look away. The prosecution attorney, James Chen, approached with a gentle smile. "Ms. Bennett, thank you for being here. Can you tell the jury about your employment at Morrison and Blake?" So she did. She told them about being a promising young attorney who believed in the law's power to create justice, about developing contractual analysis techniques, and being praised for innovation. About the day she discovered those techniques being used to commit fraud. "What happened when you tried to report this fraud?" Chen asked. "They destroyed me." Claire's voice was steady. "Within a week, evidence appeared suggesting I'd accepted bribes from clients. Colleagues I'd trusted provided testimony about suspicious behavior they claimed to have witnessed. My apartment was searched. My bank records were subpoenaed and manipulated. By the time I understood what was happening, I'd already lost." "And who orchestrated this destruction of your career?" "Richard Morrison personally oversaw it. I know because he told me." Claire looked at Morrison. "He called me into his office 2 days before my disciplinary hearing. He said I had a choice: accept the license suspension quietly and disappear, or fight back and be destroyed so thoroughly I'd never recover. He said it very calmly, like he was offering career advice." Morrison's attorney objected, claiming hearsay. The judge allowed the testimony, noting that statements by the defendant were admissible. The cross-examination was brutal. Morrison's attorney tried to paint Claire as bitter, vindictive, willing to lie to get revenge on a firm that had legitimately discovered her misconduct. But Claire had spent 3 years preparing for this moment. She'd reviewed every piece of evidence, memorized every inconsistency in Morrison and Blake's version of events, documented every way they'd manipulated the system. "Isn't it true, Miss Bennett, that you accepted money from clients in exchange for favorable contract terms?" the defense attorney asked. "No. Morrison and Blake fabricated that evidence after I threatened to expose their fraud." "You have proof of this fabrication?" "Yes. Forensic analysis of the documents shows they were created on Morrison and Blake computers after my employment ended. Bank records show the alleged bribes came from accounts that didn't exist until after the supposed transactions occurred. And 3 witnesses have testified that senior partners ordered them to provide false testimony against me." The attorney tried several more approaches, but Claire had answers for everything. Years of being attacked had taught her every angle they might use. Years of working with Ethan's legal team had taught her how to defend herself. When she finally stepped down from the witness stand, she felt hollowed out but clean. Like lancing an infected wound, painful but necessary. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Lisa testified about the systematic fraud she'd witnessed. Angela Chen presented technical evidence of contract manipulation. Former Morrison and Blake employees described the culture of deliberate deception, the bonuses paid for successfully hiding liability clauses, the partner meetings where they divided up victims like territory on a map. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, Richard Morrison stood to hear the verdict with his shoulders back and his face carefully neutral. Guilty on all counts. Claire watched from the gallery as Morrison's mask finally cracked. His attorney immediately began filing appeals notices, but everyone in the courtroom knew those were futile. The evidence had been overwhelming. The testimony devastating. Morrison was going to prison for a very long time. Outside the courthouse, Claire stood with Lisa and Ethan watching reporters conduct interviews and protesters celebrate the verdict. "We did it," Lisa said quietly. "It's actually over." "The trial's over," Claire corrected. "The work isn't." Always the optimist. Always the realist. But Claire was smiling. Ethan's phone rang. He answered, listened, then laughed. "Sophie wants to know if the bad guy went to jail like in her favorite movie. She's very invested in this narrative arc." "Tell her yes," Claire said. "The bad guy went to jail. Justice won." "Does it feel like winning?" Ethan asked after he'd hung up. Claire thought about it. About the 3 years she'd lost, the career that had been stolen, the person she'd been before Morrison and Blake decided she was inconvenient. Winning couldn't give those back. The verdict couldn't undo the damage. But it could stop Morrison from hurting anyone else. It could show other potential whistleblowers that speaking up wasn't always futile. It could prove that sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the powerful could be held accountable. Yeah, she said, it feels like winning. 3 months later, Claire stood in a small office space in Lower Manhattan with Lisa, staring at the nameplate they'd just mounted on the door. Bennett and Park, Contract Integrity Specialists. We're really doing this, Lisa said. We're really doing this. Their first client had come through a referral from Ethan, a mid-sized manufacturing company about to close a merger with a supplier. Standard deal, nothing obviously suspicious, but they wanted someone to review the fine print with fresh eyes trained to spot hidden traps. Claire and Lisa spent a week analyzing every page. They found 2 hidden clauses that would have transferred significant environmental liability, 1 camouflaged clause about product defects, and a brilliantly concealed provision that would have made the manufacturing company responsible for the supplier's pension obligations. The client canceled the deal, thanked them profusely, referred them to 3 other companies. By month 3, they had a waiting list. Turns out people value not being defrauded, Lisa said, reviewing their growing client roster. Who knew? We knew. That's the whole point. They hired their first employee, Keisha, who'd spent 6 months at Vail Industries before deciding she wanted to focus specifically on fraud prevention. Then David, who discovered a talent for database analysis during the Morrison and Blake investigation. Then 2 more paralegals and a junior attorney who'd been burned by a predatory law firm and wanted to help prevent others from suffering the same fate. The office slowly filled with the kind of energy Claire remembered from her early days at Morrison and Blake. People who believed the work mattered, who cared about getting it right, who saw law as a tool for protection rather than exploitation. This is what it should have been, she told Lisa one evening after everyone else had gone home. What Morrison and Blake should have been if they'd actually cared about serving clients instead of bilking them. We can't fix what they were, Lisa said, but we can build something better. Is that enough? It's more than enough. It's everything. 6 months after opening, Claire received an invitation to speak at a legal ethics conference about contractual fraud prevention. She almost declined. Public speaking still made her anxious, and the idea of standing in front of hundreds of attorneys felt overwhelming. But Ethan talked her into it. You have something important to say. People need to hear it, and Sophie will be disappointed if you don't, because she's apparently bragging to her entire class that she knows a famous lawyer who catches bad guys. So Claire wrote a speech, not about technical analysis or fraud detection techniques, but about what happens when the legal system fails, about how she'd believed in law's power to create justice, only to have that faith destroyed when powerful people decided she was inconvenient, about the 3 years she'd spent invisible, ashamed, convinced she'd never matter again. The scariest thing about what Morrison and Blake did to me, she said to the conference audience, wasn't the evidence they fabricated or the witnesses they manipulated. It was how easily the system believed them, how quickly I went from rising star to criminal in everyone's eyes, how thoroughly they convinced people, including me sometimes, that I deserved what happened. She talked about the Waitress uniform, about perfecting invisibility, about the constant fear that had become her baseline state. And then someone asked me to sign a contract, and I had a choice: stay invisible, stay safe, let someone else get destroyed by the trap I recognized, or speak up and risk everything I'd managed to preserve. She told them about Ethan believing her, about Lisa finding the courage to expose the truth, about Jennifer Torres amplifying their voices, about the slow, grinding work of building a case strong enough to overcome Morrison and Blake's power. I'm not going to stand here and tell you it was worth it. That's too simple. 3 years of my life were stolen. My reputation was destroyed. I lost career opportunities I'll never get back. Morrison going to prison doesn't undo that damage. The audience was completely silent. But here's what I learned. Justice isn't about balancing scales or getting everything back. It's about stopping the harm. It's about preventing the next victim. It's about showing people that speaking up isn't always futile, even when it feels that way. She talked about Bennett and Park, about building something that protected people instead of exploiting them, about finding purpose not in revenge, but in prevention. If you take one thing from my story, let it be this. The system only works if we make it work, if we demand better from ourselves and each other, if we refuse to be complicit in corruption just because speaking up is inconvenient or scary or risky. Because the alternative, The alternative is more Morrison and Blake's. More victims. More people who trusted the law and got destroyed by it. The standing ovation surprised her. Claire stood at the podium watching hundreds of attorneys on their feet applauding, many of them visibly moved, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not healing exactly, the scars from Morrison and Blake would always be there. But something like acceptance. Like understanding that brokenness didn't have to define her forever. After the conference, she met Ethan and Sophie for dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Chelsea. Sophie was full of questions about the speech, which she'd watched on live stream with her class. "My teacher cried," Sophie announced. "Ms. Rodriguez. She said your story made her think about when she had to report another teacher for being mean to students, and nobody believed her at first." "What happened?" Claire asked. She kept reporting it anyway, until someone finally listened. Then the mean teacher got fired. Sophie stabbed at her pasta thoughtfully. "She said that's what heroes do. They keep trying even when people don't believe them." "Your teacher sounds wise." "She is. She also said you should write a book because my generation needs to learn about standing up to corruption." Sophie said this very seriously, as if delivering an important message. "Maybe someday. Someday soon, because I want to read it." Ethan smiled. "Subtle, Soph. Real subtle. You always say being direct is better than being sneaky. I'm regretting that lesson." After dinner, Ethan walked Claire to her subway stop. The spring evening was warm, the city alive with people enjoying the weather. "Lisa told me you turned down 3 job offers from major firms," Ethan said. "Word travels. Apparently you're in demand. Firms want to hire the attorney who took down Morrison and Blake. They want the story, not the work. I'm more useful to them as a PR move than as an actual lawyer." Claire shook her head. "Besides, I like what we're building at Bennett and Park. It's small, but it's ours. It matters." Rebecca used to say the same thing about her practice. She could have joined a big firm, made partner, had all the prestige. But she wanted to do work that mattered more than work that impressed people. "You miss her," Claire said. It wasn't a question. "Every day. But it gets easier. Learning to remember her without the grief being overwhelming." Ethan looked at Claire. "You helped with that, you and Sophie, giving me something to fight for that wasn't just about maintaining what Rebecca and I built, something forward-looking. I didn't do anything except crash your business deal. You reminded me that some things are worth fighting for even when the odds are terrible. That's not nothing." They'd reached the subway entrance. Claire paused at the top of the stairs. "Thank you," she said, "for believing me, for fighting with me, for not letting me disappear. Thank you for being brave enough to speak up, for giving me the chance to be part of something that mattered." Claire descended into the subway feeling lighter than she had in years. The train was crowded, the commute long, but she didn't mind. She pulled out her phone and opened a blank document, typing a title, "What I Learned About Justice." Sophie was right. Maybe it was time to write the book. A year after Morrison's conviction, Claire stood in a much larger office space, watching movers arrange furniture. Bennett and Park had outgrown their original location. They now employed 15 people and had a client list that included some of the biggest companies in New York. "Never thought we'd get here," Lisa said, directing movers toward the conference room. "When we started, I figured we'd be lucky to survive 6 months. We're not surviving, we're thriving." Claire gestured at the space, windows overlooking the Hudson, enough room for triple their current staff, a reception area that looked professional instead of makeshift. "This is real. Terrifyingly real. We have overhead now, payroll, benefits packages. I signed a lease this morning that made my hands shake." "But you signed it." "I signed it," Lisa smiled, "because apparently we're good at this. Who knew?" The office warming party that evening drew an unexpected crowd. Clients, colleagues, reporters who'd covered the Morrison and Blake story, attorneys who'd been inspired to start their own practices focused on ethics and integrity. Ethan came with Sophie, who'd made them a "Congratulations on your new office" card featuring surprisingly detailed drawings of courtrooms and gavels. Jennifer Torres arrived with advance copies of her book, The Invisible Witness: How One Woman Brought Down a Criminal Empire. Claire's face was on the cover, though she'd negotiated hard to make sure it also featured Lisa and the other whistleblowers. "It's going to be huge," Torres said. Pre-orders are already through the roof. People want to understand how this happened, how Morrison and Blake operated for so long without being stopped. And what they're learning, Claire asked. That systems only work when people make them work. That speaking up matters even when it's terrifying. That one person really can make a difference if they're willing to risk everything. Torres paused. Your story, Claire. It matters. Later, when most of the guests had left and it was just Claire, Lisa, Ethan, and a few close colleagues, they sat in the new conference room with glasses of wine, talking about the future. I got approached about teaching, Claire said. Adjunct professor position at Columbia, legal ethics and contract law. You gonna take it? Lisa asked. I'm thinking about it. Might be nice to shape the next generation. Make sure they understand that being a good lawyer means more than winning cases. Rebecca taught at Columbia for a while, Ethan said quietly. She loved it, said students asked questions that reminded her why she went to law school in the first place. What made her stop? Sophie, she wanted to spend more time with her before... He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Claire thought about Rebecca, about this woman she'd never met but who'd somehow shaped so much of her current life, the office she'd worked in, the daughter she'd raised, the man she'd loved who'd learned from her that some fights were worth having even when the cost was high. I think she'd be proud of what we're doing, Claire said, building something that protects people instead of exploiting them. She would be. She'd probably also tell you to charge higher rates because you're undervaluing your expertise. Ethan smiled. She was practical like that, idealistic about justice, ruthlessly practical about business. Sounds like someone else I know, Lisa said, looking at Claire. I'm not ruthlessly practical. You negotiated our lease down by 15% and convinced the landlord to cover utilities. You're absolutely ruthlessly practical when you need to be. They talked until midnight, making plans for Bennett and Park's expansion, discussing cases they were excited about, debating whether to hire a full-time investigator or keep contracting with Angela Chen. Normal business conversations, the kind Claire had once thought she'd never have again. Walking home through Manhattan's quiet streets, Claire thought about the journey from invisible waitress to successful firm owner. About the moments where courage had won over fear, where speaking up had mattered more than staying safe, where trusting people had paid off against all odds. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Miss Bennett, this is Marcus Chen from the U.S. Attorney's Office. We've identified 7 more firms using contractual camouflage techniques similar to Morrison and Blake's. Would you be interested in consulting on the investigations? Claire stopped walking, staring at the message. 7 more firms. 7 more criminal enterprises exploiting clients and destroying anyone who threatened to expose them. 7 more battles that would be exhausting and risky and potentially devastating. She typed back, yes. When do we start? Because that was the thing about finding purpose. It didn't stop being scary, didn't stop being hard, didn't come with guarantees of success or safety or happy endings. But it mattered, and mattering was enough. 2 years after that night in the Constellation Room when a trembling waitress had whispered, "Don't sign that," Claire Bennett stood in federal court, watching 7 more senior partners from various prestigious law firms face criminal charges. The investigation she'd consulted on had uncovered a network of fraud spanning decades, affecting hundreds of companies, destroying countless careers. The judge sentenced them to prison terms ranging from 8 to 20 years. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked Claire how it felt to be responsible for cleaning up corporate fraud across multiple states. "I'm not responsible," she said. "They're responsible. I just helped expose what they were already doing. The real heroes are the whistleblowers at each firm who came forward, the investigators who built the cases, the prosecutors who saw it through. I'm just one person in a much larger effort." But that night, alone in her apartment, Claire looked at the impact wall she'd started building. Photographs and notes and messages from every person Bennett and Park had helped, every company they'd saved from fraud, every whistleblower they'd protected. The wall was covered now, spilling onto adjacent surfaces because she'd run out of room. She added 7 more names to the wall, the partners who'd been sentenced today. Not as trophies, but as reminders. Reminders that the fight wasn't over, that there would always be people willing to exploit others for profit, that the price of justice was eternal vigilance. Her phone rang. "Ethan." "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah, tired, but okay." Sophie wants to know if you're still coming to her science fair tomorrow. She's been working on her volcano for 3 weeks, and apparently it's going to be epic. Claire smiled. Tell her I wouldn't miss it. She also wants to know if you're going to arrest anyone at the science fair if she reports suspicious baking soda usage. Tell her I'll take it under advisement. After hanging up, Claire walked to her window overlooking the city. Somewhere out there, someone was being defrauded. Someone was discovering corruption and trying to decide whether to speak up. Someone was terrified and alone and convinced that fighting back was futile. She couldn't save them all. Couldn't prevent every injustice or catch every criminal or fix every broken system. But she could show them it was possible to fight back and survive. Could build institutions that protected whistleblowers instead of destroying them. Could teach the next generation that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about being terrified and doing it anyway. The invisible waitress who'd once apologized for existing had become someone who refused to be silent. Not perfect, not without scars, not always sure she was doing the right thing, but visible, present, fighting. And that, Claire thought, was enough. It had to be enough, because the alternative was going back to invisibility, and she'd learned the hard way that some things, once found, couldn't be lost again. Voice was one of them. Purpose was another. The understanding that one person speaking up could matter, that was the third. She'd spent 3 years learning to be invisible. She'd spend the rest of her life proving that visibility was worth the risk.